Majestic Owl Publishing, LLC presents Basket Delivery, Book 5 from the Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI Narrator. Chapter 1. The Wine Club was a welcome change after the book club fiasco. Since Janet's death at the start of their book club getaway, the women had decided to put the club on indefinite hold and find another way to spend time together. Hillary was relieved. The mere thought of the book club left a bitter taste in her mouth, even though she wasn't directly involved in the murder. She'd helped solve the case, and that was more than enough to convince Hillary that wine was much more therapeutic in the months that followed. It had been 6 months since Janet's death, and everyone was happier drinking wine together. They met once a month at Wine's Up. No one needed to prepare, and there was much more laughter. With a little alcohol in their systems, and without a murderer in their midst, the women were easier to get along with and friendlier toward each other. After the murder, it took time for the women to rebuild the friendships that were ripped apart with nasty words that night at the Happy Trails horse farm where everything had gone wrong. This month, they didn't go to Wine's Up. Instead, they decided to support Antonio's and their half-price special at the bar. The restaurant was a new favorite in town, and Hillary, Rose, and Annabelle were regulars. It was where they often picked up coffee in the morning and ate lunch almost every day. They worked at something special. Hillary, Rose, and Annabelle were at the bar along with the Marks sisters, Rachel and Bethany, and Melisandre. Sarah, Melisandre's best friend, wasn't able to join them this time, but they were a nice group, and it was cheery. After a while, Celeste joined them too. She owned the tanning boutique. While she wasn't in their usual circles, Celeste had joined their little wine club when she happened to be at Wine's Up the second or third time the women had met. It would have been rude to refuse her request to join, and anyway, Hillary liked her. She was soft-spoken, a little timid even. But once Hillary took the time to get to know her, she found that Celeste was quite sweet. Her reluctance to open up meant she was often overlooked. The women drank enough wine to make them giggly, and the topic of love came up. It was something that often happened during these meetings. The wine loosened their tongues, and the women were more open toward each other. They were trading love stories and talking about how they met their spouses or significant others. Hillary told them about how she met Matthew. He had passed away a few years ago from skin cancer, but he would always be her true love, even if she was starting to consider dating again. The women were giggly and loud and eager to hear the stories. They also told funny stories about their relationships. "I kid you not, my second husband was terrified of worms," Rose said. "And of course, I couldn't resist it. When I found a small worm in a head of lettuce, I left it there to see what would happen. I had never actually seen him react to worms before, and thought sure he was exaggerating." "What happened?" Annabelle asked, and everyone was curious, leaning closer to hear. "I thought the poor man was going to have a heart attack. I always thought he had been joking, but I've never seen such terror." Rose laughed as if it was the funniest thing, and Hillary smiled, shaking her head. These stories were what kept the deceased alive in their memories. It was hard to remember the sound of someone's voice after they were gone, or the curve of their neck, or the purse of their lips. But with a story like this, it was different. Stories made their loved ones easy to remember. Hillary clung to the memories of Matthew, and she encouraged Annabelle to do the same. It was better to embrace what she felt and remember all the good times than to push away the pain and forget all the memories. Grief was a strange balance, but it felt good to know that she could sit with her friends and reminisce about Matthew, without feeling like that hole in her life had opened up again. Hillary would never forget Matthew, but it was great to be all right again, to feel happy. After his death, it had taken a long time to bounce back. "Did you hear Tim finally asked Cecile on a date?" Annabelle asked. "The poor guy waited forever." "Are they together now?" Bethany asked. "I think so," Annabelle said. Rachel shook her head. "Pretty sure they're not. She doesn't like him the way he likes her. I heard they were just friends." Then why did she change her relationship status on Facebook? Annabelle asked. Rachel and Annabelle started arguing, and the rest of the women listened. They were the only two who were really involved in social media, and they knew everything that was posted, day in and day out. It only made a small town like Rosemary Harbor that much smaller. I heard that Naomi is thinking about dating again, Annabelle said. She posted a status about never being too old to look for love. She could have said that because she wants to fix things with Teddy, Rachel countered. Annabelle scoffed. Divorced people don't remarry. Hillary shook her head as the two women went on, talking about who was on the market and who wasn't, and discussing the likelihood of people getting together or breaking up. Hillary kept her ears open, hoping Annabelle would mention something about Giovanni, the bartender at Antonio's. Annabelle had been stuck on the young man for a while now. At first, she had been head over heels for him. When she realized he flirted with other women too, Hillary thought her daughter would get over him. She was wrong. Annabelle didn't move on from Giovanni. Hillary knew that in a town as small as Rosemary Harbor, there were very few prospects, but she had hoped Annabelle would forget about Giovanni. He was a womanizer, and Annabelle deserved better. Sadly, Annabelle was still stuck on him, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship. Sometimes Annabelle was deliriously happy. Other times she cried about Giovanni all night long. Sometimes Hillary thought it was too bad her daughter wore her heart on her sleeve. Annabelle fell in love fast, and she believed in fighting for something because of the example Hillary and Matthew had set for her in their own relationship. It would have been fine if Annabelle had fallen for someone worth the effort. But Hillary didn't think Giovanni was all that. She glanced toward the other end of the bar, where Giovanni was pouring drinks for a couple of businessmen. He had the classic Italian jet black hair and tan skin, but instead of dark eyes they were a baby blue. It was what all the women fell for, Hillary thought. Giovanni was attractive, and he knew it. He was confident to the point of arrogance, and this was what put Hillary off him. He wasn't the man she would be happy to invite into her family if Annabelle was serious about him. Hillary sincerely hoped her daughter would give up on him sooner rather than later. Giovanni glanced over at Annabelle. He stared at her for a short while, trying to get her attention, but Annabelle was in a heated argument with Rachel about the relationship status of someone they both knew. After a while, Giovanni looked away. A woman approached the bar to order a drink, and Giovanni offered her a dazzling smile. Typical. Rose listened to the conversation between Annabelle and Rachel with a smile. She was the town gossip, and she knew everything there was to know about the relationships in Rosemary Harbor. She didn't need social media to get the inside scoop either. But times were changing, and technology had become so advanced that no one's business was private anymore. Not that anyone's business in Rosemary Harbor had been private before. Still, Rose believed social media made the world a smaller place. And small places had more gossip. The world had become a mix of everyone's dirty little secrets. Rose was still on the fence about whether or not that was a bad thing. She enjoyed knowing about other people's lives, about what made them tick and what made them upset. She was a nosy woman. She knew that about herself, and she was happy with it. Rose glanced at Hillary, who was also not taking part in the conversation or attentively listening to the girls arguing. She noticed Hillary looking over her shoulder and followed her gaze to the end of the bar. Of course, Hillary was looking at Giovanni. The bartender had managed to win Annabelle's heart, and Annabelle seemed set on being with the man, even though Rose was sure he wasn't good for her. Rose knew everything about Giovanni. For a long time he had dated Tara Fulone, who co-owned the tanning boutique, A Place in the Sun with Celeste. They were still on and off, if she wasn't mistaken. It looked like Giovanni was after Annabelle when he wasn't on with Tara, but anything was possible. There were other women in the mix, too. Like Celeste McDaniel, the other owner of the tanning boutique. It was easy for Giovanni to have a relationship with both those women when they made him a silent partner in their business. Easy maybe, but a terrible idea business-wise. It was the biggest mistake either of them could ever have made. It didn't make Giovanni more reliable or more faithful in the least. Rose believed he'd also had a brief affair with Samantha Justin before the author had been arrested for arson. It was a pity that Annabelle was also involved with Giovanni. Rose liked her. She was a sensible girl with compassion and kindness. But she also wore her heart on her sleeve, and that was a problem when a man like Giovanni skulked around the streets, claiming all the young girls' hearts. "What are you looking at?" Melisandre asked Rose. Rose started to protest that she wasn't looking at anything at all, but Melisandre caught the drift, and her eyes sparkled. "Do either of you know if Giovanni is on the market?" Melisandre asked Annabelle and Rachel, stopping their conversation. Rachel snorted. "With that man, who knows?" Celeste cleared her throat. Not many people knew that she had been involved with Giovanni for a while now, since the relationship was never official and public. But Rose knew, and she wondered if Celeste would speak up. "Actually," Annabelle said, "I have it on good authority that Giovanni is very much off the market." Everyone turned their heads to Annabelle. Rose noticed that Celeste paled, and it wasn't hard to guess that she hadn't known about this. Which probably meant she wasn't involved with Giovanni. If Tara, her business partner, was, Celeste would have known. So who was? Hillary had been thinking the same thing. Thanks to Rose, who always had an ear to the ground, and no difficulty relaying any information she heard to Hillary when it was quiet at something special, Hillary knew everything about Giovanni's ongoing flirtations with the two women at a place in the sun. It was one of the reasons she disliked Giovanni so much. A man who toyed with women's hearts was a disgrace. "How do you know?" Rachel asked Annabelle. Annabelle shrugged and managed to look innocent. "Oh, you know. The rumor mill. It's impossible to keep secrets around here." Rachel nodded and excitedly started wondering out loud who it could be, all the while sneaking glances at Giovanni. Annabelle didn't offer any specific names, and it seemed to Hillary that her daughter was content with none of them knowing what it was all about. She was almost sure Annabelle was the other half of that equation. Her daughter had been eager all evening to talk about the partners of every person they discussed, but now she was tight-lipped. It could only mean one thing. Hillary wondered why Annabelle thought it was important to keep her relationship with Giovanni a secret. Maybe keeping it from Celeste was the sensible thing to do. Hillary had confided to her what Rose said about Celeste and Giovanni, hoping that Annabelle would end it with him for good. Hillary hadn't known anything about Annabelle's apparently on-again relationship with Giovanni, and that upset her. She had always had a very open relationship with her daughter, and had always felt that Annabelle could tell her anything. After Matthew died, their relationship had only become closer. It was upsetting to think that Annabelle hadn't told her about something that was going on in her life. In fact, it made her furious. Hillary couldn't say anything now, in front of all their friends, but she was going to mention it as soon as they were alone. She wanted Annabelle to tell her what was going on. No matter what it was, Annabelle had always known that Hillary would give her sage advice without judgment. Hillary didn't want to see her daughter hurt, but she knew Annabelle was old enough to make her own choices. At Annabelle's age, she had yet to experience all the ups and downs of life. It was part of growing up. But Annabelle had experienced more than the average woman her age, with Matthew's illness and death, followed by their move to Rosemary Harbor. Hillary had hoped that Annabelle had more sense than to mess around with someone like Giovanni. Hillary and Matthew had had a wonderful relationship, filled with love and respect. They had each put 100% into their relationship and fought through whatever went wrong in their lives together. Annabelle had had the best example of relationships that a girl could ever ask for. Which was why Hillary didn't understand why Annabelle would give her time to a womanizer like Giovanni. He was the polar opposite of who Matthew was. Surely Annabelle could see the differences between Giovanni and her father, and understand that being with the bartender would only result in heartache. Hilary didn't understand what Annabelle could possibly see in Giovanni as a long-term prospect, or as a prospect at all. Rose reached over and squeezed Hilary's hand. She understood what was going through Hilary's mind, and she hoped for Hilary's sake and Annabelle's that everything would work out. She knew it usually did, but she hoped that Annabelle's heart wouldn't be shattered in the process. She had seen how close Hilary and Annabelle were, and she had heard so many stories about what a wonderful man Hilary's late husband was. "You know," Hilary interjected, and everyone fell silent to look at her. "Being in a relationship isn't always easy. It's always great to have a good guy, but no one is perfect. Take my husband Matthew, for example. He was a wonderful man, generous and attentive, and he had a sense of responsibility to his family that no one could have replicated. But he had his faults too. He tended not to share his emotions, and he was so scatterbrained that he forgot to tell me things, which made it sound like he was doing something underhanded. But I loved him and trusted him." "I miss him," Annabelle said. Hilary nodded. "Me too. I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though not everyone is perfect, the right things need to be in place. Like loyalty." She glanced at Annabelle, catching her eye before carrying on. "And kindness. And a strict moral code. If I were to ever date again, I would want someone stable, who knows exactly what he's doing with his life, who has a sense of right and wrong, and who knows where to draw the line." Rose chuckled, sipping her wine. Hilary frowned. "What? It sounds to me like you just described Preston." Hilary shook her head. No. I was just using examples." She was trying to defend herself, but at the same time her cheeks flushed, and heat crept up from her collar. "Look, she's blushing," Melisandre laughed. Hilary was embarrassed. She hadn't wanted to make it sound like this was about Preston Davis, Rosemary Harbor's police chief. She had only hoped to show Annabelle that even though someone had good qualities, they had to have the right qualities too. This was going in a completely different direction than she had intended. Rose lifted her glass. "To Hilary and Preston," she laughed, and everyone raised their glasses in a toast. Everyone but Annabelle, who looked stupefied. She looked at Hilary with the same shock that Hilary had felt when she had realized Annabelle might be dating Giovanni again. Annabelle had hoped the attraction between Hilary and Preston would die out. The police chief had taken an interest in her mother since the moment they had arrived in Rosemary Harbor, and even though Hilary told Annabelle she wasn't interested in dating, Annabelle could clearly see that there was something between them. Preston often turned to Hilary for advice, and he seemed to run into her a lot lately. Not only that, but Hilary seemed to love the attention. It wasn't right, Annabelle thought. Hilary had had the love of her life. She had been married to him for almost 30 years before he died. She couldn't just forget about Matthew and move on like that. When Annabelle had first realized Preston and Hilary were attracted to each other, she had made her thoughts on the matter very clear. Even though Hilary and Preston had only gone on one official date and a few coffee dates as friends after that, Annabelle was sure the attraction wasn't over. Now more than ever. And she didn't like the idea at all. Hilary was just as stunned about the toast as Annabelle was, but for very different reasons. She had turned down Preston's advances because she hadn't been ready for a new relationship so soon after she had lost her husband. Even though she was attracted to Preston, and she did think he was a wonderful man, there had been no official mention of anything between them. Why did Rose think they were involved at all? Rose was so involved in everyone's business that Hilary worried her word would be taken as fact, now that she had said something about Preston and Hilary out loud. Hilary was so caught off guard when Rose made the toast that she didn't have time to think about countering the comment. Now, after everyone had toasted, it was too late. The women laughed and gossiped, nudging Hilary and telling her she had good taste in men. Hillary felt uncomfortable with it and was surprised that the conversation had gone in this direction. She only wanted to show Annabelle that her choices might not be the best. And now she was the center of attention. And Annabelle didn't look at all happy about what was being speculated. Hillary glared at Rose. The older woman was a great friend, but sometimes she made life very difficult for Hillary. Chapter 2. The next morning, Hillary and Annabelle were doing a delivery run together. Hillary's head was pounding after the wine she had last night. A bottle of wine offered a pounding headache without fail every month when they got together for the wine club. And every morning after, Hillary wondered why she had drunk so much. When she glanced at Annabelle, her daughter didn't seem to be suffering nearly as much as she was. It was one of the blessings of being young. Annabelle's body recovered much faster after a night of drinking wine. The conversation was strained in the truck as they drove from one delivery address to the next. Hillary wasn't sure if it was because of the hangover she suffered from, or if perhaps Annabelle felt worse than she let on. Or maybe it was about the conversations at their wine club last night. Things had gotten a little out of hand with Rose's toast, and even though the conversation hadn't gone toward Annabelle and her love life last night, Hillary was still upset that Annabelle hadn't shared anything with her. There was still a chance that Annabelle wasn't the object of Giovanni's affection. Hillary had only been speculating, after all. Even though she had vowed that she would talk to Annabelle about it the next time they were alone together, Hillary just didn't have it in her to talk about such intense things this morning. Her head throbbed painfully, and she felt physically drained. It had taken a lot of energy to get herself to something special for a full day's work in the first place. Hillary's mind jumped to food. She had had coffee in the morning, as they usually did, but she needed more if she wanted a cure for her head and her stomach. After the deliveries were taken care of, she decided they would stop at Antonio's for a breakfast sandwich. Perhaps when they were there without last night's company, Hillary would be able to see how Annabelle reacted to Giovanni and find her answer that way. Maybe she had gotten it all wrong, and asking Annabelle would only put her daughter on the spot after things had ended for good between her and the bartender. The last thing Hillary wanted was to make things awkward for Annabelle. "Some of the baskets are heavy today," Hillary said, making small talk. "Yeah," Annabelle answered. She was distant, lifting her phone every now and then to check for new messages. "Maybe we should limit our catalog so we don't have baskets that are so heavy. Wine and candles can get very heavy together." "Yeah," Annabelle said again. Hillary sighed. Annabelle wasn't being very talkative at all. That only made everything harder. Hillary hoped Annabelle wouldn't be this quiet all day. She needed to be able to talk to her daughter. When Hillary parked along the street a short distance away from a place in the sun, she climbed out of the van and walked around it to the back. She opened the doors and pulled out the basket that was addressed to Tara Fulone. It was the heaviest basket of them all. Hillary grunted as she heaved it out of the back. She lugged it toward Annabelle's door. "Don't you want to help me with this?" she asked. Annabelle was young and strong, and she didn't look like she was suffering at all from a hangover. "Not really," Annabelle asked. "I'm texting." Hillary wanted to argue with her daughter. She wanted to make her get out of the van and carry the basket. But she had worded her question wrong. Annabelle had told her time and time again that asking the question that way was a strange thing to do. Taken literally, it was easy to get a no. And Hillary had done that exact thing. So, instead of making an issue of it, she grumbled and rolled up her sleeves. It was her fault for having that much wine last night, after all. Hillary knew that she didn't recover as well as she used to. She was getting older, and even though she was young at heart and she made an effort to stay active, she didn't bounce back from alcohol so well anymore. Hillary hauled the basket up, using both arms to support the weight. She glanced at Annabelle one more time, hoping her daughter would notice her struggling and come to her rescue, but Annabelle was typing furiously on her phone with a smile on her lips. Hillary rolled her eyes and started walking. There was no doubt that Annabelle was texting someone of the opposite sex. Women didn't smile at their phones like that if they were talking to a friend. And Hillary was willing to bet that the person Annabelle was talking to was Giovanni. Even though she wasn't sure if she was right, Hillary trusted her gut. And her gut was rarely wrong. She'd followed her gut so many times in past investigations with Preston, and she'd solved crimes and proven her friends innocent as a result. The basket was painfully heavy, and Hillary wished she had parked closer to the door. But she usually parked farther away to leave the closer parking spaces open for customers. There was nothing worse than trying to get around a delivery van to find a parking space, and Hillary wanted something special to have a good name, always. She put the basket down at the halfway point to catch her breath. The basket contained 2 bottles of wine and a selection of candles, along with various other items. She packed it herself. Who needed 2 bottles of wine? Hillary couldn't think about wine at all in her current state. She would seriously look into what was possible for future basket orders. They had to limit wine bottles to 1 per basket, no matter how much more expensive the baskets became when more bottles were ordered. Hillary had smiled at the price when the basket was ordered. She wasn't smiling now. Hillary picked up the basket with difficulty and carried on toward the tanning boutique. The faster she made it there, the sooner the basket could be delivered and done with. It would literally be a weight off her shoulders. A commotion drew her attention, and her step faltered when she noticed a police car with flashing lights pulling up in front of a place in the sun. One of the younger officers who worked under Preston jumped out and ran into the tanning boutique. Hillary frowned. She stopped walking, wondering what was going on. A moment later, Giovanni was escorted out in handcuffs. His shoulders were hunched, and he wore a distraught look on his face. It made Hillary's heart break for him. No matter how much she disliked the man, she didn't like it when something went wrong. And if he was being arrested, something had gone very wrong. Hillary heard a squeal behind her. Annabelle had noticed Giovanni too. She had opened the van door and she stood on the curb, her face ashen. Giovanni was loaded into the police car as the cop pushed his head down, then the cop closed the door behind him. The car started and drove off much more slowly than it had arrived. Hillary turned to head toward her daughter, who obviously needed the emotional support. But Annabelle didn't wait to be comforted. Instead, she ran around the truck and jumped into the driver's side. She turned the ignition and peeled out of the parking spot. When she was on the road, she sped past Hillary, who was stranded on the curb with the heavy basket. How was Hillary going to get back to the shop now? She sighed. Annabelle's reaction to Giovanni's arrest answered her question about whether or not Giovanni and Annabelle were involved. Her daughter would never have set off after him if they hadn't had something going on between them. Well, wasn't that a way to find out where things stood? It had upset Hillary that she had to guess where Annabelle stood with Giovanni. It was even worse that she had found out for sure now that Giovanni had been led away in handcuffs and Annabelle had taken off after him in the van. What had Giovanni done to be arrested? Hillary hadn't thought about that until now. She had been more worried about Annabelle and her reaction. But if her daughter was involved with a man who had just gotten arrested, there were bigger problems than Annabelle having a secret relationship. Hillary heaved up the basket again and walked slowly toward the tanning studio. She had to deliver the basket so her curiosity would be satisfied. When Hillary finally reached the tanning boutique, she walked in through the front door the way she always did. She didn't use the back for delivery purposes. She knew Celeste personally. She didn't know Tara very well, had only ever greeted her in passing, but she liked what she did know of the woman. Celeste was behind the counter, and she looked up when the door pinged to announce Hillary's arrival. "Good morning," Hillary said brightly, setting the heavy basket on the floor. Not really, Celeste said, and her eyes welled up with tears. What happened? Hillary asked. When she saw Giovanni being taken away, she assumed he had stolen something or broken something. It's Tara, Celeste said, and the tears spilled onto her cheeks. She was found dead in one of the tanning beds this morning. Hillary's blood ran cold. Giovanni had been taken away in handcuffs for murder? Oh no. I am so sorry to hear that, Hillary said. That's horrible. I can't even imagine what you must be feeling. Celeste shook her head. I don't know who could do such an awful thing. I don't even know how I'm going to keep this up without her. She gestured around her at the tanning boutique. My goodness, don't worry about that now, Hillary said. Just take care of yourself. She walked around the counter and hugged Celeste. Losing a loved one to murder was so much more traumatic than an illness or an accident. Celeste shuddered and sniffled as Hillary hugged her. I'm so sorry, Hillary said. Tara and Celeste had been business partners and good friends, though their friendship hadn't been without difficulties. Hillary heard that they had both been after Giovanni for years. But losing a friend like this had to be horrible. I don't know what I'm going to do, Celeste cried. I have to run the salon by myself now. You can worry about that later, Hillary said. Just focus on dealing with this first. Hillary didn't want to be insensitive, but she couldn't help her curiosity. I saw them take Giovanni away, she said carefully. Was it him? Celeste cried harder, and Hillary wondered if she had been wrong to ask. It really was insensitive. Celeste didn't answer Hillary, and Hillary decided not to push it. Well, this was supposed to be for Tara. Where would you like me to put it? Hillary asked, changing the topic to the gift basket she had brought in. I guess put it over there, Celeste said, pointing at the small table against the far wall. Those are hers too. Hillary walked over to it. Two large floral arrangements took up the small table. When Hillary put the basket down next to the arrangements, she noticed the petals were wilting slightly. One bouquet was worse off than the other. Tara had obviously not changed the water often enough. Both arrangements had cards that were signed, Your Love. It was the same message that was on the card with the gift basket Hillary had brought. It gave nothing away about who the admirer might be, and it only piqued Hillary's curiosity more. The basket order had been an anonymous phone order paid for with a prepaid Visa card. Hillary had a lot of questions, but she didn't want to push it with Celeste. The poor woman was understandably distraught. Hillary would wait until she could find out the facts some other way that wouldn't offend anyone. Hillary was about to leave when Police Chief Preston Davis stepped through one of the doors that led to the back. Hillary, Preston said, looking surprised. I didn't expect to see you here. He glanced at Celeste. I was just leaving, Hillary said. I had a basket to drop off. Let me walk you out. Hillary let Preston escort her out of the tanning salon. She knew Preston wanted to talk about what had happened and wouldn't feel comfortable doing it in front of Celeste. I was here delivering a gift basket for Tara, Hillary explained once they had reached the road. It's awful to hear what happened to her. Preston nodded. Murder is so unwelcome in this little town. It feels like it hits the community so much harder than in the city. I guess I'm prejudiced in saying that. Murder is always so sad, but every time I come across a case like this, I can't help but notice how much it affects everyone around us. We're all so intimately connected in this little town. Hillary nodded. She fully understood what Preston was trying to say. It was different when the victims were people they knew well. There had been too many deaths in Rosemary Harbor. Was it Giovanni? Hillary asked. Celeste hadn't answered her questions, and she still wondered how it all fit together. He's our number one suspect, Preston said. According to the rumor mill, he is either Tara's ex-boyfriend or her current boyfriend. Preston thought about the facts he had found out. When he was in the tanning salon, he had noticed a few things. In addition to the flowers on the table in the front, the storage room had been filled with flowers and baskets and gifts. There had been so many, it could have doubled as something special's pop-up shop. Tara received a lot of gifts from someone who always signs the card with "Your love," Preston said. I noticed that, Hillary agreed. It was the same with the basket I delivered. Preston nodded slowly. It was a pity none of the baskets had been signed with a name. He would have liked to know who sent them. Why Giovanni? Hillary asked. She enjoyed that Preston was open with her about the case. They had had a bit of a rough patch when he told her to stay out of police business. The way he had approached it had nearly ended their friendship. But since then, another murder had taken place, and Preston had asked Hillary to help. She was the only person Preston knew for a fact was innocent of the crime. Solving the crime together had strengthened the bond between Hillary and Preston, and they were friends and allies again. Well, I thought about it and decided that if Giovanni had been the one to send all those flowers and gifts, he was quite clearly obsessed with Tara. Some people do crazy things when an obsession gets out of hand. He at least needs to be questioned. Hillary shivered. The thought of Giovanni being a creeper that way made her worry for Annabelle's safety. What if it wasn't him? Hillary asked, hoping she could somehow redeem Giovanni and so redeem her daughter's taste in men. I thought about that too. We don't know what it's all about. So, if it's not Giovanni who sent them, he might have felt threatened. If he still cared about Tara, which I'm almost sure of according to the rumors, and he thought she was leaving him for someone else, he might have killed her out of jealousy. It's a valid motivation. Hillary nodded. That makes sense. It's horrible that it happened and that someone, Giovanni perhaps, has the ability to take a life. I know. I'm starting to realize that there are some twisted people out in the world. The murder rate in Rosemary Harbor has picked up over the past couple of years, and I'm not happy about it. I have to head down to the station to question Giovanni, and I can tell you, I'm not looking forward to it. Hillary, remembering that Annabelle had left her on the curb, turned to Preston. Would you mind giving me a ride to the police station? She asked. Why? Preston asked. I can drop you off at the shop. How did you get here? Hillary sighed. I was driving the van to do our deliveries. I stopped here to drop off Tara's basket and Annabelle waited in the car. But when Giovanni was led out in handcuffs, Annabelle took off in the van, chasing after him. I think she's at the police station now. Probably pleading his case, no doubt. Preston shook his head. It didn't make any sense to him. I don't understand. Until I walked into a place in the sun this morning, I was sure that Annabelle was the woman Giovanni had been dating. Hillary explained to Preston what had led her to believe that. She was texting and smiling all morning. When she saw Giovanni taken away, she freaked out and set off after him without thinking about it twice. These are all signs. Preston sighed. I have a feeling this isn't going to be a straightforward case. Giovanni had his fingers in a lot of pies from what I can tell, and he kept a low enough profile to pull it off, even in a town this small. That's saying something. You had better come with me. Hillary walked with Preston to his police car. As they drove, a few heads turned their way as they saw Hillary in a cop car. But everyone knew Hillary and Preston were friends, and Hillary wasn't worried about her image. Now that she was sitting down again, and there were fewer distractions, Hillary's headache returned. She pressed her fingers to her temples, wondering if she was going to get a chance to have her breakfast sandwich to cure her hangover. I don't know how we'll get to the bottom of this, Preston said, thinking out loud. We'll figure it out, Hillary said. Preston glanced at Hillary and smiled. Indeed we will. You and I are in for another crime ride. Chapter 3. Hillary couldn't believe she was in Giovanni's apartment, rummaging through his things. She had been in people's apartments before, even when she wasn't allowed to be, but this situation was unique in that she was with Annabelle. They had permission and a key. And she still hadn't had her breakfast sandwich. Her head hurt, and she wasn't in the best mood. A wine hangover always seemed like the worst thing, and Hillary wondered again why she did this to herself. She envied Annabelle. Her daughter didn't seem to suffer at all. The wine club had seemed safer than the book club in so many ways. They had all had to deal with a tragic death when the hostess of their book club getaway was murdered. But Hillary was starting to wonder if the outcome of her wine nights was really worth it. She always felt like this after she drank wine with the women. She always vowed she wouldn't do it again. And she always went back the next month and did the same thing again. What was it they said about insanity? She'd hoped that she could raid Giovanni's medicine cabinet for an ibuprofen or something, but that had been a bust. The man was clearly not very organized. He barely had the basics in his apartment, let alone extras like Advil or Tylenol. His apartment was messy, which seemed to add to Annabelle's flustered disposition. Annabelle was fluttering around the apartment, moving from one space to the next, fussing about things. She was an emotional mess. Giovanni's arrest had affected her quite badly. Hillary watched her daughter and wondered if this was proof of how serious things were between her and Giovanni. Hillary thought about poor Tara and wondered again if the match between her daughter and the bartender was a good one. Hillary decided to accompany her daughter to Giovanni's apartment because she wasn't sure if Annabelle's emotions were stable. When Annabelle was upset, she easily let her emotions get the better of her. In a case like this, it was always wise to stay calm. Of course, Hillary could also understand why Annabelle was so upset. She herself had been more than distraught when Rose was locked up for starting a fire that had nearly killed someone. She understood what Annabelle was going through, and for that reason, she decided that Annabelle needed her mother, if not for help, then at least for emotional support. When Hillary and Preston arrived at the police station, Giovanni hadn't been booked yet. He was waiting in the processing office, sitting hunched over on the wooden bench with his elbows resting on his knees. He looked very lost. When Giovanni saw Annabelle approaching, he had all but fallen into her arms. He looked like he wanted to hold on to her as a buoy that would pull him back up to safety. Annabelle had been on the verge of tears, and the two had a hushed conversation that Hillary only heard snippets of. It seemed strange that Annabelle was willing to make their secret relationship suddenly so public, but Annabelle didn't look like she cared at all. She had begged Hillary to let her help, and Hillary didn't have the heart to say no to her daughter. Annabelle's heart was invested in Giovanni, and no matter how this case turned out, Hillary knew her daughter would get hurt one way or another. It was inevitable when there was a murder involved. Hillary didn't want to tell Annabelle how to live her life. Annabelle was going on 25, and she could make her own choices as an adult. But Hillary wanted to be there for her as guidance. She couldn't tell her what to do anymore, but she could try to soften the blows. At this age, Hillary was only there as a friend. And even if Annabelle didn't look to her for guidance, being there for her daughter was the least Hillary could do. Giovanni asked Annabelle to pack an overnight bag for him, and Annabelle had jumped at the opportunity to help him. Seeing that there was only one van, and Annabelle's mind wasn't on the shop at all, Hillary didn't think she was going to go back to something special soon anyway. She was just glad that the delivery to a place in the sun was the last on their list for the day. So here they were. It was a little unnerving to be in a stranger's apartment, saddled with the task of going through their personal things. Given her feelings toward Giovanni, Hillary chose not to be too involved. She understood that Annabelle might meet people Hillary didn't necessarily approve of, but it was about morals in this case. Giovanni was under arrest after all. Of course, Rose had been arrested for arson, and she had been innocent. It said nothing about her character, although a lot of the citizens of Rosemary Harbor had been quick to believe she committed the crime. What if Giovanni was innocent and Hillary was falsely condemning him? Only time would tell. Annabelle was growing more flustered and emotional as she looked around the apartment. Her romance with Giovanni had been up and down for a while, but she knew what she felt for him, and she was sure he was innocent. He had to be. She simply didn't believe that he could do something like commit a murder, at least not this kind of murder. From what she heard, Tara had been locked inside a tanning bed, its cable pulled to prevent it from turning off. Giovanni was a passionate person. If he'd murdered someone, it would have been a spur-of-the-moment, knock-him-on-the-head kind of murder. No, he couldn't have killed Tara. So she would do what she could to help him. Hillary watched Annabelle as she moved around Giovanni's apartment, opening and closing cabinets and closets and searching for what he needed. She noted that Annabelle didn't look at home in his apartment and didn't seem to know where everything was. It gave Hillary some relief. She had clearly not missed that much in her daughter's love life. Annabelle might not have mentioned that she was involved again with Giovanni, but it wasn't so serious that Annabelle had spent hours at a time in his apartment. Eventually, Hillary took pity on her emotional daughter and decided to help, even though she still felt sick with her hangover. They searched through Giovanni's apartment together to find clothes, shoes, a jacket, and a toothbrush. As they found things, they also found a long history of women who had been in Giovanni's life. Especially in his bedroom, where lingerie was tucked into his closet or bedside table, love letters lay scattered on a desk, and pictures were up against the wall. Hillary spotted napkins with numbers written in lipstick. It was everywhere, even on the fridge. Giovanni may have been currently involved with Annabelle, but it didn't look like he was planning on sticking around for very long. He had kept so much from previous women, there was barely space for Annabelle. Annabelle had noticed all the items that didn't belong to her, and she was getting angry. She knew Giovanni was a ladies' man, and she had known that she was the latest in a long line of relationships. But she had hoped he was over all of that, and was focused solely on her. He made it seem that way whenever they were together. Giovanni always had the perfect words to make Annabelle believe she was his one and only. As it turned out, he used the same words on a lot of people. Annabelle had no idea what she felt. She was upset that Giovanni had been arrested for a crime she was sure he couldn't have committed. When she saw Giovanni being led to the police car, she had been shocked that Preston, a man who had become something of a family friend, would make such a grave mistake. Annabelle still didn't believe that Giovanni would have done something so horrific to Tara, but she was starting to wonder about the type of person he was. She didn't like seeing the evidence of the other women he had been with. She thought he'd gotten rid of it, as she thought they were a little more serious now. Annabelle wasn't sure she wanted to be that closely involved with him, if he could trick her into thinking she was the only one when she quite clearly wasn't. Together, Hillary and Annabelle managed to put together an overnight bag for Giovanni. It was what Annabelle had promised she would do, even though she had considered more than once leaving the apartment without giving Giovanni what he wanted, purely out of spite. She hated that she was being tricked. Hillary noticed Annabelle getting upset about everything they came across. She had to admit, it was like being forced to read someone's private journal, and the contents weren't tasteful. She was outraged for Annabelle's sake. She had known from early on that Giovanni flirted with women as a rule. Annabelle had gotten upset about his behavior before. Hillary wondered if she should say something to Annabelle about Giovanni's social habits. Surely it wasn't the kind of life Annabelle could have envisioned for herself, was it? Hillary was prepared to say something, but her attention was drawn to a flyer that fluttered down from the fridge. She kneeled and picked it up. It was a flyer from a woman named Dr. Lee, and was all about the connection between skin cancer and tanning beds. On the back, a nasty commentary was written in a woman's handwriting. "Did you know anything about this?" Hillary asked, holding up the flyer. Annabelle looked up and noticed the flyer. It was something she had seen before, and that was a relief. There was something in the pile of love notes and telephone numbers that she actually knew about. It didn't make everything else she had found better, of course, but at least there was one thing in Giovanni's life she understood. That she felt that way at all was a red flag, but she pushed the thoughts away. She would handle one thing at a time. Right now, Giovanni was in a holding cell, and he needed an overnight bag. Yeah, that's from Dr. Lee, Annabelle said absently to Hillary. Is that the woman who's been putting up all the signs? Hillary asked. The name was familiar. That's the one, Annabelle confirmed. Dr. Lane Lee was a dermatologist. Since she had come to town, she had been on the warpath to shut down a place in the sun. She had tried at town meetings to convince the board that the tanning salon was a health hazard. The board had refused to listen. The tanning salon offered packages for tourists who wanted a quick fix for the beach, and they weren't about to turn down tourist dollars. So Dr. Lee started a petition. She hadn't received many signatures. Vanity trumped health every time. It was a sad fact that women and men alike would risk their health for the sake of looking good. The last couple of months, Dr. Lee has been a bit of a pain, Annabelle shared. She sent warnings to all the customers, telling them what they're risking, trying to get Tara to close her doors that way. But you know how charming Tara can be. Annabelle sighed. She corrected herself. I have seen Dr. Lee going on about a place in the sun, Hillary said. But what does this have to do with Giovanni? Oh, he co-owns the tanning salon with Celeste and Tara. He's a silent partner. Hillary blinked, surprised. This was news to her. She'd had no idea that Giovanni had shares in a place in the sun. It changed everything. Maybe all those flowers in Tara's storage room had nothing to do with her death. Maybe her career had driven the killer to take care of her. Hillary folded the flyer and tucked it into her pants pocket. It would be wise to show it to Preston, she decided. I didn't know Giovanni did anything else than tend the bar at Antonio's, Hillary said. Annabelle shrugged. He said he was going to sell his shares in the salon. I don't know what will happen now with Tara's death, but he was tired of Dr. Lee making such a fuss. Annabelle hated that Giovanni was involved in the tanning salon. Her own father had died of skin cancer, so she tended to agree with Dr. Lee's views on it, although she didn't agree with the woman's aggressive way of handling it. Giovanni had promised her he was getting out of the business, and it had been one of his redeeming qualities. Giovanni had told Annabelle that he much preferred his job at Antonio's, despite the pay. He enjoyed being around people, and his job as a bartender had opened his eyes to the world of wine. Antonio had dreams of opening his own wine bar with the money he got from selling off his share of the business. It sounded a lot better to Annabelle that Giovanni wanted to invest in wine rather than something that she felt did cause skin cancer. Giovanni had said more than once that he would take Dr. Lee to court if he didn't get out of the business as soon as possible. He had no patience for the woman, and Annabelle understood why. The tanning salon's business would start to suffer if Dr. Lee kept it up. Annabelle wasn't sure what would happen with Giovanni's questioning. She hoped he was innocent, but the fact that she wasn't 100% sure bugged her. Why was she doubting him? Still, she couldn't help but wonder what she would do if it turned out he was guilty. She wouldn't want to be with him, that was for sure. But his image had already changed for Annabelle, and not only because of the arrest. Going into Giovanni's apartment and seeing the hidden side of who he was had changed her mind about him. And when something like that happened, it was impossible to change her mind back to what she once thought. They left the apartment and climbed into the delivery van to head back to the police station. Whatever happened, Annabelle decided, she would take it one step at a time. Chapter 4. During her lunch break the next day, Hillary headed to the public records office. She needed to find out what happened, for Annabelle's sake. This case had to be closed ASAP. Hillary wanted to get behind who had committed the murder, and the only way she was going to find that out was by starting with what was already known about the suspects. Plural. Hillary had realized there was a possibility that Giovanni could be innocent after she found Dr. Lee's flyer in his apartment. There were more people invested in the matter of the tanning salon, whether they were for or against it, and if anyone was emotionally invested in any way, the murder could have been the result of that investment. Hillary wasn't upset about Giovanni co-owning a tanning salon the way Annabelle seemed to be. Matthew had died of skin cancer, but he had never been in a tanning bed in his life. He had never been vain about his appearance. He had, however, spent hours in the sun, which had eventually caused cancer. It wasn't like Hillary could hate the sun. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and Hillary had accepted what happened to Matthew and made her peace with it. What bothered her was that Annabelle seemed to have forgiven Giovanni for all the other women that she had found out about just yesterday. All those notes and phone numbers and undergarments should have been red flags to Annabelle. And for a while Annabelle did seem angry. But now, just a day later, she seemed to have forgotten about it, now that she wasn't in Giovanni's apartment anymore. This time, out of sight, out of mind wasn't a good thing. Annabelle may not have been staring at it the whole time, making it easy to forget, but Giovanni certainly had reminders of all these women on a daily basis. How could Annabelle believe Giovanni would change? People didn't change, not that much anyway. The Public Records Office was attached to the town hall, but it had a separate entrance so that it was still a separate building of sorts. This side of the town hall wasn't nearly as well maintained as the front of the town hall itself. It needed a new coat of paint, there were weeds in the planters that needed to be tended to, and rust had started forming on the metal door, causing brown spots that became visible as Hillary approached. Hillary stopped outside the building. She had so many thoughts mulling around in her mind, she needed to take the time to work through them first, before walking into the building. Hillary wasn't one to be negative, but this time her daughter was involved, so it was difficult to approach everything with a neutral mind. This had happened once before. When Rose was taken into custody as a suspect in the attempted murder of the bookstore owner, Hillary had also been very emotionally involved. Her choices had been driven by her emotions and her urge to prove her friend wrong. The silver lining here was that Annabelle wasn't directly involved in the case. Only her heart was on the line. It was safer than if she had been cuffed as a suspect. Hillary took a deep breath and let it out again, looking at the building. It was interesting to note that even though the front of the building was so beautiful, the back of it left much to be desired. It was like that with a lot of people as well, Hillary thought. They came across as charming and put together, but once you got to know them and saw other sides to them, it turned out they needed a lot of maintenance. She thought of Giovanni. He would need a lot more than a proverbial lick of paint to turn him into a man who would be good enough to date her daughter. Of course, Annabelle was old enough to make her own choices. It made it harder for Hillary to step in and protect her. Hillary had to let go so that Annabelle could be her own person. She had to have the freedom to be an adult and decide which direction her life was going to take. But it was still hard for Hillary to step back and watch her spend her time with a man who didn't take commitment very seriously. Still, if Annabelle was willing to risk her heart, there was nothing Hillary could do about it. On the other hand, Hillary wasn't about to let Annabelle date a man who was a murderer. She had limits, and that was where she drew the line. If he was a rotten person, it wasn't illegal. Hillary could do nothing about Giovanni's moral compass. But the moment Annabelle became involved with someone who had done something illegal, especially something as serious as murder, she was going to put her foot down. She didn't care what Annabelle had to say about that. What if Giovanni had done it? What if Annabelle put herself on hold for someone with a criminal record, someone she could only see through a bulletproof window? Or worse, what if he was released even though he was guilty, and Annabelle kept up her relationship with him? Hillary shook her head and tried to calm herself. Her thoughts were running away with her, and everything she was thinking was based on Giovanni being guilty. Hillary didn't know that Giovanni was guilty. She didn't know anything about the man other than what Annabelle had complained about when she had decided before that he wasn't worth her time. She had decided that several times before, but she always went back to him. Judging by the proof in Giovanni's apartment, he was charming enough to get women to forgive him for his trespasses, even though they might know full well what kind of a man he was. Annabelle had a good head on her shoulders, and even she had forgiven him over and over. Hilary tried to shake the irritation that came with the thought. She couldn't let it upset her this much now. She had to find out what was going on so she could form educated opinions about Giovanni. Right now, she disliked him purely because she believed her daughter could do better. The flyer Hilary found at Giovanni's apartment was in her bag. Hilary had taken it with her. The handwriting on the back was quite nasty. After what Annabelle said about Dr. Lee being against the tanning salon, she had become something of a suspect in Hilary's mind. It was hard to believe the woman would commit murder, though. Even the flyer seemed very out of character for Dr. Lee, although Hilary did know that the dermatologist had petitioned against the tanning salon. Of course, it was in her interest. There was enough evidence that suggested tanning salons were dangerous, and Dr. Lee was passionate about her work as a dermatologist. Hilary had gone to Dr. Lane Lee's office twice since the woman had arrived in Rosemary Harbor to have her skin checked. After Matthew's death, it seemed like the safe thing to do. Hilary hadn't seen Dr. Lee very often aside from her visits, but she hadn't ever thought the good doctor to be crazy. Dr. Lee was a small woman with jet black hair and a sweet smile. She was of Asian descent, and dermatology was her sole focus. Hilary had quite liked the woman when she met her, and she had felt comfortable enough to share her tragic story about Matthew's death with the doctor. For Hilary to be able to open up to someone about what had happened was special. She'd never gotten an off feeling about Dr. Lee at all. Yes, she was dramatic. She tended to get very emotionally involved in the things she was passionate about, and she could create quite a scene if she thought something was wrong. She was expressive and didn't hold back, positive or negative. It was endearing to see her because Hilary had often thought she herself would have felt so much better if she had the ability to express herself like that, instead of bottling things up the way she tended to do sometimes. Despite her ability to express herself fully, Dr. Lee wasn't the type to send out flyers like that. Hilary didn't think so, at least. So here she was, visiting public records to see if she could add liar to the list of traits she had already attributed to Giovanni. Perhaps it was unfair of her to assume that Giovanni had tried to set up Dr. Lee in some way, but Hilary wanted a reason to condemn the man, if not as a felon, then at least as someone unfit to be with her daughter. Perhaps Giovanni was upset that Dr. Lee had turned him down. Perhaps he had tried to seduce her. But Dr. Lee was married to that electrician, Robert Willis. She had kept her maiden name, so people who didn't know them wouldn't have made the connection immediately, but it was something Hilary knew thanks to Rose and her consistent feed of information. Hilary decided to give Dr. Lee the benefit of the doubt. If it turned out that it was true that Dr. Lee had a history of flying off the handle, maybe even to the point of committing murder, then Hilary wouldn't have lost anything. After Hilary sorted out her thoughts, she walked to the rusting doors and pulled them open. The inside of the building was air-conditioned and a lot drier than the humid ocean air outside. As with the outside, the inside of the building needed maintenance. It was in better shape than the outside, but a good coat of paint, a bit of polish and new carpet would go a long way, Hilary thought. She walked to the counter in the center of the room, where a woman moved from one side of the counter to the other. She wore glasses on the bridge of her nose, and she kept flicking her hair out of her face. "Good afternoon," Hilary said. She had seen the woman around town a few times, but she didn't know her personally. She only knew her name was Sarah Bosworth. "Hi, how are you?" Ms. Bosworth asked. "I'm well, thank you," Hilary said with a smile and proceeded to explain what she was looking for. She wanted any records involving Dr. Lee. As everyone in town was nosy, Hilary expected to be bombarded with questions. Sometimes the need to gossip saved Hilary. She found out a lot about cases she was involved with, thanks to the sharing of information that seemed to be the root of Rosemary Harbor. This time, it was different. Ms. Bosworth didn't ask questions or share information of her own. She politely asked only what she needed to know to find what Hillary was looking for, and then offered Hillary a file. The file was a lot thicker than Hillary had anticipated. There was a lot of information to be had on Dr. Lee. Hillary flipped through the documents, her eyes flitting over the information as she paged through the file. Annabelle had been right. Apparently, so had Giovanni. He had been telling the truth about Dr. Lee causing trouble for the tanning salon, and she had created enough havoc that the police needed to step in. There were public incidents, many of them revolving around the city council and their meetings where Dr. Lee had caused trouble. She had done everything in her power to stop A Place in the Sun from operating, drawing up petitions, hosting pep rallies, and disrupting meetings. Dr. Lee seemed to be a very different woman from the dermatologist Hillary had confided in about Matthew's death and her fear of getting skin cancer herself. It was hard to believe it was the same woman, but everyone had more than one side, and Dr. Lee was definitely passionate about her cause to the point of obsession. One of the pages Hillary came across was a restraining order against Dr. Lee, ordering her to stay away from Giovanni and refrain from contacting him. Why were there no restraining orders against Dr. Lee for Tara and Celeste? It seemed very personal if it was for Giovanni alone. It made Hillary wonder again if there had been something more to the story, but of course, there was nothing in the file about possible failed relationships and attempts. As Hillary kept reading, she found more and more evidence that Dr. Lee was indeed not the woman Hillary had thought her to be. Maybe she could still not be labeled as crazy, but she seemed a lot more of a problem than she had been before. Unfortunately, all the documents Hillary came across, no matter how condemning for Dr. Lee, did seem to prove Giovanni right. He hadn't been lying about who Dr. Lee was. Hillary had hoped she could prove him wrong, although that was strictly personal. She sighed and carried on reading, even though it became repetitive for quite some time. Still, Hillary took the time to work her way through everything in the file in case she found something that she could use. Not finding much, she returned the file to Ms. Bosworth. "Could I please look at the records for A Place in the Sun?" Hillary asked. "I can see what I can find, but business records are often confidential," Ms. Bosworth replied. "I understand," Hillary said. Ms. Bosworth returned with a thin file, and Hillary already felt disheartened. Compared to the very thick file she had worked through, where she had not found much of interest, she doubted she would find anything worth using when there was so little to be had to start off with. Still, Hillary paged through the file, and as luck would have it, she found a change of ownership from 3 partners to 2. The filing party was simply A Place in the Sun LLC, but Hillary assumed that it had been Giovanni. It seemed he had followed through with what he told Annabelle. Pity. Everything Hillary found proved that Giovanni, although a charmer and a flirt with trouble committing to one woman, had been telling the truth. Considering that Hillary's intentions of proving that Giovanni was a liar were personal, she let it slide. She didn't like him, but it wasn't in her nature to falsely accuse someone of something if she knew the truth. She knew enough about Giovanni to know she didn't want her daughter to associate with him. She hoped Annabelle would see it soon too. Hillary thanked Ms. Bosworth and handed back the file before leaving the office. Even though she had found out a few things she hadn't known about before, Hillary still felt that the information didn't help her solve anything. As she wasn't technically allowed to be on the case, it wasn't a terrible thing, but Hillary wanted desperately to find out if Giovanni was guilty, and if he wasn't, who was. It was another case she was personally invested in, and she was glad Preston wasn't insisting she not get involved, and that they had made their peace. After Janet Hines's murder, Hillary had been the only one who could help Preston solve the case. Not only had he apologized for his previous behavior, but he had personally asked her to help him. Being involved allowed Hillary's relationship with Preston to grow, and it also soothed her curiosity. Hillary still didn't know where she was headed with Preston romantically. She was drawn to him, but being involved with a new man after Matthew's death, even though it had been a few years now, still felt strange. At least they were good friends, and that mattered to Hillary. With a little bit of new information, maybe she could help her friend out. She still had a few things she wanted to look into before she could say she had anything worth reporting. Hillary was great at deductive reasoning, but for that, she still needed information. Not to mention her curiosity. Despite being against gossip, she still wanted to know what was happening all around her. It was a catch-22, but there it was. Hillary climbed into the delivery van and drove back to Something Special, where Rose was taking care of business. Annabelle was at the store, but because Giovanni was still being held at the station, she was distracted, and Rose had taken over her duties. So Hillary had a couple of things to take care of before she could continue her search for information. She might not be able to prove Giovanni a liar, but she did have proof that the partnership at A Place in the Sun was definitely going from 3 to 2. Chapter 5. Hillary couldn't leave the store to resume her investigation for the rest of the day. They had an influx of customers, and with Annabelle distracted and Rose dealing with orders on the phone, Hillary barely had a chance to take a breath. She was, however, able to make an appointment with Dr. Lee. It wasn't time for her checkup, but she wanted to talk to Dr. Lee herself. She didn't know what she would tell Dr. Lee once she was there about why she needed to make the appointment, but she would think of something. When Hillary left the shop the next day to go to her appointment, Something Special was thankfully quiet. Annabelle was more present and able to keep her mind on the store. Perhaps she was using it as a distraction. She could only worry so much about Giovanni. He was still in custody. Preston seemed reluctant to let him go, which made Hillary wonder what his reasons were. When Rose had been arrested, there had been a strong case against her, and she had still been innocent. Hillary wondered how similar the situation was with Giovanni. When Hillary arrived at Dr. Lee's office, she checked in with Marcy, Dr. Lee's friendly receptionist. Marcy, a young woman who always seemed to be smiling, was friends with Annabelle, and they hung out together sometimes. Annabelle needed more friends, Hillary thought. Maybe that would keep her mind off boys for a while. It was only the hope of a protective mother Hillary knew, that no matter how many friends Annabelle had, she would be ready to follow her heart when she met someone and was ready for a relationship. It had been this way for Hillary and Matthew, after all. Hillary only hoped that Annabelle's heart didn't lead her in the wrong direction. After checking in, Hillary took a seat. She shared the waiting room with another woman who was waiting to see Dr. Lee. Hillary didn't know her. She usually started conversations in the waiting room, but this woman kept to herself by reading the provided magazines and never even looked up. They weren't together in the waiting room for 10 minutes before Dr. Lee's current patient came out and the woman went in. Hillary was alone in the waiting room when Preston phoned. "How are you managing?" Hillary asked after they exchanged pleasantries. Preston sighed heavily. "Not as well as I would have hoped. Lately, the murders around town have only been getting more complicated. I would have preferred they didn't happen at all, of course, but it seemed like the earlier murders were easier to figure out than they are now. It's as if they're getting smarter, even though it's never the same person twice. Obviously. I have faith in you. I know you'll crack this," Hillary said. "Thank you," Preston said. "I usually crack it with your help, though." Hillary couldn't argue with that. She glanced up as Marcy rose to go to the little bathroom that was adjacent to the waiting room. "Where are you?" Preston asked. "I was at the shop just now." Hillary knew she had to tell Preston the truth. He deserved to know she wasn't minding her own business. "I'm at Dr. Lee's office," she admitted. While Marcy was in the restroom, Hillary summarized what she had found at Giovanni's apartment as well as at the public records office. "I need to find out what's going on. At least for Annabelle's sake." She knew she didn't need to say more than that. Preston knew about Annabelle's history with Giovanni since Samantha Justin, the author, had been his object of desire. Preston had also been in the restaurant with Hillary when Annabelle and Giovanni had had a public fallout. "Dr. Lee is on my radar as well," Preston admitted. "It's nothing official yet, but I'm looking into a few things behind the scenes. Will you let me know what you find when you're done?" "Of course," Hillary said. Marcy opened the restroom door and returned to her desk. Hillary glanced up at her. She now had to be careful with what she said out loud. All of Rosemary Harbor didn't need to know what she was doing, and she knew that Marcy was as fond of sharing what she heard as everyone else. It was almost a tradition in town. "Thank you," Preston said. "Have I ever told you that I appreciate you?" Hillary blushed. "I'm only here to help," she said shyly. Preston managed to get her flustered, even when he wasn't trying. "Well, I'm glad we're friends," Preston said, and Hillary could hear the warmth in his tone. "Me too." Hillary smiled. They ended the conversation, and Hillary smiled at her phone. Preston was such a good man. He had his faults, but everyone did. Hillary did have feelings for Preston. She couldn't deny that. But she wouldn't admit them to anyone else. For now, being good friends with Preston, and being tangled up with him in cases from time to time, was everything Hillary was ready for. Maybe as time marched on, things would change. For now, she was happy with where she was. Hillary put her cell phone back into her bag. Preston hadn't berated her for being involved when he hadn't asked. She appreciated it. He seemed to understand that Hillary needed to investigate on Annabelle's behalf. He respected her need to keep Annabelle safe and to protect her from heartbreak. For a man to respect a mother's need to protect her daughter was a sign of respect. And it meant a lot to Hillary. Dr. Lee's patient came out of the inner office, nodded awkwardly at Hillary, and left. A moment later, Marcy announced that Hillary could go in to see Dr. Lee. Hillary walked into the large office. It was a light room, with white walls and a pale gray carpet, a copy of a Monet painting hanging on the wall, and a fern in the corner. Dr. Lee smiled at Hillary when she walked into the office and sat down. "You're back early, Hillary," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Oh yes. Perfectly fine, thank you. I have been struggling a little with dry skin." Hillary was impressed with herself for thinking of a reason so quickly. It wasn't even entirely false. "That's very unlike you," Dr. Lee said, flipping through Hillary's file. Hillary nodded. Dr. Lee pushed up Hillary's sleeve and ran her hand up and down Hillary's arm. Then she scribbled something on a notepad and handed it to Hillary. It was a prescription for an oil that Hillary could use. Hillary glanced at the note before tucking it into her purse. Even though she hadn't come here for a remedy of any kind, Dr. Lee's ideas always worked, and Hillary might still try it once she was done with the investigation. Hillary wondered how she was going to bring up the tanning beds without it seeming obvious that she wanted to talk about Dr. Lee's current cause. "Do you have a good sunscreen to recommend? I was thinking for something that would protect me against the sun, so I thought I'd ask now that I'm here." "Of course," Dr. Lee said. "It's so tedious to lie in the sun every day, but I don't see how anyone can go to a tanning salon. It's the same result in so little time, it can't be right." "Oh, I know exactly what you mean," Dr. Lee said, and Hillary noted that the woman didn't look happy at all. "And you're so wise for staying away from that place. But you have first-hand experience with the horrors of skin cancer, so you're wiser than most." Hillary nodded. This wasn't about Matthew at all, but if Dr. Lee needed to believe that to get talking, Hillary didn't mind letting Matthew help her out. "You know, I started in this business to save lives," Dr. Lee continued. "Really? It doesn't sound like anything noble to be a dermatologist." She laughed bitterly. "But your skin is your biggest organ. If you don't look after it, it can kill you like any other organ in your body does. No one seems to understand that. I knew this from very early on. I never went to tanning salons when I was younger, not even when I was in college, and I wanted to look my best. Hillary nodded in sympathy. Dr. Lee was on a roll, and Hillary didn't want to stop her from saying everything she needed to say. Hillary had learned long ago that if there was space to speak, people confessed to things they normally might not just to fill the silence. People often trip themselves up this way. I studied biology first, can you believe it? Dr. Lee said and chuckled, as if she remembered something. I wanted to specialize in genetics. But when I realized how little people know what can happen to you through your skin, I switched to dermatology and I never looked back. I love what I do. And you're very good at it, Hillary acknowledged. Dr. Lee smiled. Thank you for saying that. She frowned a little. I must say, even though I have loved my job from day one, I tend to take it too seriously. Hillary wanted to ask questions, but again she remained silent. I started with good intentions, you know? Dr. Lee sounded like she had regrets, and Hillary paid attention. She wondered if Dr. Lee was headed toward a confession of sorts. She doubted it would be that easy, but sometimes when people did something wrong, it weighed on them so heavily they had to come clean or it would consume them. What did Dr. Lee have that weighed on her? What had she done that she regretted now? For whatever reason, Hillary was a shoulder to cry on for many people. They always seemed to think they could confide in her. Hillary had never underestimated the responsibility that came with having so many secrets to bear. Deep down, she liked it when people wanted to lean on her. She was a nurturer by heart. Lately, there had been cases where confessions had come to light thanks to Hillary's caring nature and what she was told by those who had done something wrong. Hillary hoped it would happen again. Right now, a woman had been murdered, and they weren't sure who the killer was. Tara had been a good person. Even if she hadn't been, no one deserved to die that way, and no one had the right to exact judgment if they weren't a part of the law. It's just so easy to get caught up in a cause, and to take things too far. Too far? I'm sure you understand that, don't you? Hillary nodded. She did indeed understand that. When Rose had been taken into custody as a suspect for attempted murder, Hillary's judgment had been clouded a little bit. Even though she had never considered doing something drastic, she knew full well what desperation and passion could do to a person if they didn't have the inner strength to stay in control. It only takes one tragedy to snap a person out of it. It was Tara's death that did it for me. I was so serious about the tanning salon and trying to shut them down, I did things I'm not proud of. I became someone I didn't want to be. You know, I almost ruined my marriage because of it. My husband was hired to do some electrical work at the tanning salon, and I just about threatened to leave him if he took the job. She sighed. Thank goodness we were able to work through that, and we're fine now, mainly thanks to my patient husband. But no one deserves to die, not the way Tara did. And certainly not for something like that. Hillary nodded. Sadness overcame her again, even though she hadn't known Tara very well. It always pained her when someone was robbed of their life by another. There had been too much of that happening in Rosemary Harbor lately. In all the years Hillary had lived in Miami with Annabelle and Matthew, death had not been a part of her life the way it was in Rosemary Harbor. Of course, Miami was a lot bigger, and there was no doubt crimes taking place there that would make Hillary gasp. But in a town as small as Rosemary Harbor, there were no secrets. When something went wrong, not only did everyone know about it, but almost everyone ended up being involved in some way or another. It's no secret that I thought the tanning salon was dangerous, Dr. Lee said. But I never wanted anything to happen to the girls that run it. As Hillary listened, she was starting to think that maybe Dr. Lee was innocent of Tara's death. Dr. Lee had admitted that she might have gone overboard with her cause, but it was a big step to go from petitions to murder. Besides, Dr. Lee didn't look like the type of person to snap and kill someone. Despite her passion for heathy skin, she seemed far too calm and controlled to commit murder. It is sad to lose someone so young, Hillary said, finally speaking. And a businesswoman at that. It takes a lot of work to open up a company and work so hard, especially in the face of adversity. Hillary looked to see Dr. Lee's reaction. She wondered if Dr. Lee would say something that implicated her after all. It was easy to put up an act, and to be sad about a death. Janet Hines's death by the hand of her own sister-in-law, a woman who had cried about it, on Hillary's shoulder no less, had proven that to her. It is sad, Dr. Lee agreed. Such hard work should be rewarded, not punished. I should get going, Hillary said. Her lunch hour was nearing its end, and she had gotten more or less what she had come for. Of course. I'm so sorry. I took all your time talking about everything but your skin. Hillary shook her head. I'm always here to listen. She meant it too. I hope the oils I prescribed you will do the trick. And stay safe when you're out in the sun, Dr. Lee said. Hopefully, everyone will head out into the sun now. Hillary frowned. What do you mean? Tara's death might close the tanning salon for good. What a blessing that would be. Hillary didn't respond to that. She took her leave and walked out of the office. She was a little taken aback by Dr. Lee's final comment. The entire conversation had been riddled with sympathy and sorrow until the very last statement. It was out of character, and it put a question mark back where Hillary had thought the matter to be resolved. If that was what Dr. Lee was hoping for, could it be that she murdered Tara after all? Hillary didn't want to point fingers like that, but the comment was unsettling. Without any more facts, though, she could do nothing but speculate and hope that she was wrong. Chapter 6. When Hillary finally headed home, it was late. She had stayed behind to do a stocktake with Rose. Once that was complete and Rose had gone home, Hillary stayed even later to rearrange the shelves. She changed the shelves around every week to show the customers other products. The changes caused customers to notice other things that they hadn't seen before. Annabelle had been home since 5 o'clock. She still seemed distracted since Giovanni's arrest, and Hillary had let her go despite the stocktake. Annabelle could make it up to her in other ways. Hillary understood how difficult it was to have someone you cared about in a holding cell as a suspect. On the way home, Hillary called Preston. He answered almost immediately. How are you doing? Preston asked. It's so busy at the station right now. I feel like every day is as long as 2. I'm well, thank you for asking, Hillary said. I saw Dr. Lee today. Of course, Preston said. He seemed to have forgotten that Hillary had been there, but if he was as busy as he claimed, she understood. Sometimes work was so slow at the station that Preston was constantly bored. But he never complained because everyone knew that a quiet day at the station meant nothing had gone wrong. When something like a murder happened, everyone was kicked into high gear. It was good to be busy, Hillary understood, but it wasn't good when people got hurt. How did it go? Preston asked. I'm not quite sure what to think, I must be honest, Hillary said. I went there thinking there might be something to discover. I was hoping for a clue of sorts. I had a long talk with Dr. Lee, and she opened up to me. I don't know how you do that, Preston interjected. Everyone seems to lean on you and confide in you about things I didn't believe they would tell anyone. Sometimes it's more of a curse than a blessing, believe me. I can understand that. What have you found out? Hillary could hear the hope in Preston's voice that she had found something useful. It was never a good feeling to find out that someone had committed murder, but the sooner the case was wrapped up, the sooner everyone could go to bed knowing that a killer had been taken off the streets. At this point, I really don't know if Dr. Lee did it, Hillary admitted. Throughout my conversation with her, I was convinced that she hadn't done it. She was so sympathetic. She admitted that she might have gone overboard with her cause against the tanning salon, but she said she'd never wanted Tara to get hurt. Sometimes the killers are brilliant actors, Preston said. I thought about that. I thought about Megan, and how she had been crying on my shoulder about Janet until the moment she was arrested for her murder. Everything about that case was heartbreaking, Preston said. Hillary agreed. It had been one of the harder cases she had been involved with because she knew every suspect so well. She had been the only person with an alibi, and as a result, there was a lot of chaos between friends, a lot of fingers pointed, and a lot of feelings hurt before it had all been wrapped up. When skeletons were brought out of the closet, they always came with a lot of pain. What made you think that Dr. Lee could still be a suspect? Preston asked. As I was leaving, she made a comment about hoping that Tara's death would close the salon. The whole conversation had been very sympathetic, but that last statement was very emotionless. It seems strange to me. That is interesting to note, Preston said. I appreciate you reporting back to me about this. I will have to bring Dr. Lee in for questioning, after all. I was looking into her, and I was almost sure it would be unnecessary, but we can't ignore comments like that. When they ended the conversation, Hillary wondered if she should feel guilty that she had tricked Dr. Lee into thinking she could confide in Hillary. But Hillary hadn't gone there to condemn the woman, only to find out facts. And someone had been murdered, after all. It was important to find out who did it. Preston would never make Dr. Lee seem like a killer if he found out she wasn't, and he would keep what Hillary told him quiet. In a town full of nosy neighbors and busybodies, Preston was very good at keeping secrets. It was a quality to be admired. When Hillary arrived home, she walked to Annabelle's room to share the news with her daughter. She wouldn't tell her the whole story, but she wanted Annabelle to know that Giovanni wasn't the only suspect. Hillary hoped that it would lift Annabelle's spirits. Since the arrest, Annabelle had been distracted and miserable, and even though Hillary didn't approve of Giovanni, she couldn't disregard her daughter's feelings. A second suspect meant there was a chance that Giovanni was innocent. She hoped for Annabelle's sake that it was the case. But when she went to cheer Annabelle up, Hillary found her daughter furious in the bedroom. "What's wrong?" she asked before breaking the news. "I found out something about Giovanni today. I can't believe him. Every time I find out something about him, it's bad." "What did you find out?" Hillary asked. Annabelle's anger wasn't what she had expected at all. She sat down on Annabelle's bed while her daughter paced up and down in front of her closet. This isn't Giovanni's first run-in with the law. He has been written up for harassment. Several times. "Oh my," Hillary commented, not sure what to say to that. It wasn't what she expected to come home to. "I'm furious," Annabelle exclaimed. As if all the evidence of the women in his life wasn't enough, I find out that he has a history of harassing people. It's ridiculous. Is there no end to what I'm going to find out about him? Annabelle sank down onto her bed and covered her face with her hands. Hillary shook her head and stroked Annabelle's back. She wished she could save her daughter from all this heartache. Unfortunately, life could be cruel. Love and romance didn't come with a user guide, and like most women in the world, Annabelle had to kiss a couple of frogs before she could find her prince. "Do you know what the worst is?" Annabelle asked, lowering her hands and looking at Hillary. "I was so willing to think the best of him, to defend him to anyone who tried to tell me what kind of man he is. They were right. I'm such an idiot." Hillary shook her head. "You're not an idiot. Some people are just a lot better at hiding their true colors." She didn't add that love was also blind. "I can't believe I was interested in someone who would treat women so badly," Annabelle said. Hillary felt sorry for her daughter. Heartbreak was horrible no matter what form it took. Annabelle would find that out in the years to come. She would learn to deal with it until she found the right man. When Annabelle had been interested in Giovanni, Hillary feared that she would settle for less than she deserved. Now that she saw her daughter's reaction to what she had found out, she realized that Annabelle had her head screwed on right. She would make the right choices, even if it took a little bit of time. Annabelle sighed, and she looked so upset Hillary hugged her. Hillary hated seeing her daughter in pain, but she was glad Annabelle had found her breaking point with Giovanni. The harassment write-ups didn't look good. I think that Celeste and Tara were pushing Giovanni out of the business, Annabelle said. I don't think he chose to leave. That's possible, Hillary agreed, although she knew little about Giovanni's intentions and business plans. I think it pushed him over the edge, Annabelle said again. She was being a lot more clear-headed about Giovanni now that her anger had shattered the rose-tinted glasses with which she had been looking at him throughout her involvement with him. Maybe it was what pushed him to start harassing them. Hillary thought about all the flowers and gift baskets she had seen at the tanning salon when she had gone to deliver the gift basket on the day Giovanni was arrested. For a doting lover, it could have been sweet, but for someone uninterested, the constant gifts could have been disturbing, if not downright scary. I know it hurts to find out these things about the people we care about, Hillary said. But it's better that you know sooner rather than later. Annabelle nodded. I haven't been as blind about Giovanni as you think I've been. Hillary frowned. I know you were worried about it. Don't act like you weren't, Annabelle said. I wanted to believe he was a good man, but I found out things along the way. I forgave him for it because you make compromises for the people you care about. I saw that with you and Dad. Hillary wanted to comment, but Annabelle shook her head. Let me finish, she said. I realize that it's good to make compromises if they're willing to compromise for you too. And there are some things that aren't worth compromising for. Hillary nodded. That was indeed the best lesson her daughter could have learned. The journey with Giovanni had opened Annabelle's eyes more than Hillary could ever have hoped. Her little girl was gone, and in her place sat a woman grown up and gaining wisdom by the day. I can't tell you how proud I am of you, Hillary said. And Dad would have felt the same. Annabelle smiled sadly. I miss him. I would have liked to talk to him about it. Me too, Hillary admitted. Giovanni wasn't only involved with Tara, Annabelle said. He was involved with Celeste too. Really? I think I might have heard someone mention that, but I wasn't sure if it was true. Annabelle nodded. I didn't realize it at first, but now that I know, her reaction at Antonio's when we had wine together makes sense. Both Celeste and Tara had been with him. That puts me off. Hillary couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had disliked Giovanni from the start and strongly disagreed with his loose behavior with women, but this was a new low. It's like something out of a soap opera, Annabelle said, disgusted. And I don't feel like being a part of the cast. Imagine what the other women are saying about me. I wonder if they know, Hillary mused. Annabelle shrugged. If any of them have half a brain, they will figure it out. Hillary nodded. Annabelle was right. And it was like a soap opera. Annabelle had seemed to get out of it before it went too far. She was disappointed, maybe a little heartbroken, but she wasn't shattered. It was good that she had found out so soon. Now Annabelle could remove herself from the cast of this horrible show, and Hillary could finally relax about her daughter's heart. They had yet to find out who murdered Tara. Giovanni was still a suspect, and Hillary kept going back and forth about whether he was guilty or not. Sometimes she didn't think him capable because he seemed so spineless and unable to handle conflict. Other times, when she found out things like the harassment charges or his ability to juggle so many women, her thoughts moved in the opposite direction. Whatever the case, Hillary was glad Annabelle wasn't involved in it anymore. Chapter 7. Hillary looked in the mirror one more time before she walked to the front door to wait for Preston. He was going to pick her up at the house, and they would go out for dinner. Since Hillary had moved to Rosemary Harbor, Preston had been interested in spending time with her. She wasn't been ready to move on from Matthew, even though it had been a while since his death, but she was attracted to Preston. Slowly, as time passed, Hillary and Preston became closer, and this was the first time Hillary felt comfortable about going on an official date with him since she had first told him she wasn't interested in a romantic relationship. They were getting close enough that Hillary had to admit it was starting to lean towards something more romantic than friendly. And Hillary realized she was all right with that. When Preston arrived, he smiled at her. Hillary grinned back, glad she felt so relaxed around him. "You look very nice," Preston said when he hugged her hello. "Thank you," Hillary said with something that felt like a blush. "You look good too." When on duty, Preston was always in uniform, but now he wore a semi-casual suit, and he looked good. Preston was handsome for a middle-aged man. Hillary couldn't deny it. "Have you decided where you want to go?" Preston asked. He told Hillary that the place was up to her. "Antonio's," Hillary said. Preston's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You want to go to Antonio's?" Hillary nodded. "I love the food there." Preston slowly nodded, agreeing to take Hillary where she wanted to go. He had promised that she could choose the place after all. He thought she would choose somewhere different, though. The restaurant was very popular, but that also meant that it was the gossip hub of the town. It seemed like going on an official date to Antonio's was just asking for a rumor to start. "I don't mind going to Antonio's," Preston said to Hillary when they climbed into his car. "But you know there are a lot of other restaurants we can go to, right?" Hillary smiled and nodded, but she didn't change her mind. Preston shrugged. If that was where Hillary wanted to go, it was where he would take her, even though she stopped at Antonio's for breakfast or lunch at least once a day. Even though it was the coffee spot for all the women working at something special. Hillary looked out the car window as Preston drove her to Antonio's. She couldn't admit to Preston that she had an ulterior motive for her date with him. She didn't want him to feel like she was only using him. She was interested in him, and she had been looking forward to spending time with Preston all day. But Giovanni had been questioned, and Preston hadn't found enough information to charge him with murder. As a result, Giovanni had been let go, and he was free to roam the streets of Rosemary Harbor and flirt with every woman who was willing to have him. Hillary knew there were a lot of women happy to entertain Giovanni. She was worried that now that Giovanni was able to contact her daughter again, he might charm Annabelle back to him, again, and that she would give him another chance, again. Antonio's was full when they arrived, but they managed to get a table. It wasn't very close to the bar, but Hillary could still see Giovanni from where she was sitting. Preston sat opposite Hillary and watched her as she glanced around the restaurant before her eyes slid back to the menu she was holding. He tried to figure her out. He had the feeling there was more on her mind than only the date and spending time with him. He wanted to be there for her. They were good friends now. Even if they never became more, no matter how much he would like it, Preston felt the liberty to be there for her and offer his support. Hillary put the menu down on the table when she had decided on her appetizer and glanced at Giovanni again. He was pouring drinks for the people at the bar. So far, he hadn't spoken to any women, and he hadn't done anything that could give her an indication of what his agenda was. Preston took her hand and Hillary looked at him. She wasn't sure what he was doing, and she was a little annoyed. Yes, she was there to spend time with Preston, but she also wanted to watch Giovanni to see if she could find out anything about him. But Preston was looking at her seriously, and she wasn't sure what to expect. "How are you coping with all of this?" Preston asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're involved with this case. You've been involved with all my cases from the start, but you've been more involved lately than ever. I was wondering if it's too much for you." Hillary started shaking her head and getting ready to tell Preston that she enjoyed being involved with the cases. But he carried on talking before she had a chance. "This case is so much more intense than the others. With Annabelle involved and Dr. Lee, does it remind you of Matthew?" Hillary hadn't thought about it that way. At least not consciously. But now that Preston had put it into words, Hillary realized that it had been hard for her. The idea of skin cancer had been in the back of her mind, and with it came the sorrow of having lost her husband. And Hillary was still worried about Annabelle. It was the first time Preston had directly mentioned Matthew. It must have been hard for him to start this conversation. Hillary nodded. It hasn't been easy, I'll tell you that. I try to push it away. I have to move on from Matthew's death at some point. And I need to let go of the reins and let Annabelle live her life and make her own choices, even though I don't always agree with them. I understand that can be hard, Preston said. In both situations. Hillary nodded. I guess I'm pushing this hard to see it solved, for that reason exactly. In a way, I hope it will feel like I'm putting it behind me. When it's over, it won't bother me. Preston nodded. I can understand that. And I agree. I want it solved as soon as possible, too. Preston didn't only want the case solved because he was worried that it was negatively affecting Hillary. He wanted to solve the case because the longer a murder case stayed unsolved, the more nervous he became that the killer would strike again. So far, it hadn't happened in any of the murder cases he had solved before, but Preston didn't want to assume that it never would. He wanted to solve it and be done with it, knowing he had done what he needed to do to keep the citizens of Rosemary Harbor safe. I know this is our night together, and the idea is to get to know more about each other and wind down, Hillary said. But do you want to find out what the staff has to say about Giovanni possibly leaving? She looked at Preston with an expression that suggested she wasn't sure how he would react. Preston nodded. He had hoped that they would be able to talk about things unrelated to the case, but the conversation had turned very serious, and he wanted it to lighten up again. Hillary always got excited about a case, and seeing her light up when she spoke about the clues she had found or how she wanted to go about finding out the next piece of information was a sight to behold. Hillary was beautiful when she was in her element. Tell me again what you mean by leaving, Preston said. Hillary had mentioned something to him about Giovanni wanting to start his own business. Giovanni told Annabelle that he's leaving the tanning salon partnership and he wants to open his own wine bar. He didn't want to work with Tara and Celeste anymore, and he doesn't want to work here either. Now that it looks official, I bet he will be leaving here soon. Hillary didn't have to add that the partnership had suffered from Tara's death, and that it had probably sped up Giovanni's departure from it. It was a motivation Preston had explored, thinking that Giovanni had either killed Tara to get rid of the partnership, or that he had killed her because they had filed for the dissolution of the partnership. Neither of the motivations Preston had been working with had been enough, though. Let's see if they have anything to say about it, Preston agreed. When their waiter Danny returned to their table, Hillary smiled politely at him and decided to start with some small talk. It's busy tonight, Hillary said to Danny. Very, he answered. Aren't you understaffed? Hillary asked. Preston saw where she was headed with the conversation. Yeah, we're a little short-staffed. At the moment we're fine, Danny said. We'll see how it goes once Giovanni leaves. Hillary glanced at Preston. He's leaving? She asked Danny. Danny nodded. Yeah, apparently he wants to start his own thing. He's been talking about it for months. Looks like he finally has the money. Danny shrugged as if he didn't care. Hillary asked a couple more questions before Danny excused himself to take care of his other tables. Let's see what other waiters have to say, Preston said. Every now and then, Hillary and Preston stopped one of the waiters coming by and made friendly conversation. They skirted the topic, making small talk until someone said something. It wasn't hard to get information. Everyone was willing to talk about what they knew. In Rosemary Harbor, the youth grew up with the idea that gossiping and sharing information was normal. This was a good idea, Preston said when they had spoken to nearly everyone. Is this how you find everything out? Hillary chuckled. I don't have conversations with everyone solely for the sake of finding out information if that's what you're suggesting. But you'd be surprised how much you learn if you just make a few friends. It appears to be so, Preston said. It was easier for Hillary to investigate in this way because she wasn't the town police chief or in law enforcement. She didn't have to follow protocol when questioning suspects, and her career didn't depend on whether she could solve a case. A lot of people were tight-lipped when it came to Preston and his questioning at the station, but it was to be expected. Being arrested for anything was never fun, and he often had to get through barriers of fear or defiance before he could get to the truth. Hillary watched Preston add up things in his mind, and she had to admit that whatever she felt about spending time with him, he was a very attractive man. She enjoyed it when he asked her to help with an investigation, although her friendship with him wasn't going to stay quiet for much longer. It was only a matter of time before the people Hillary had befriended and had listened to figured out that Hillary gave Preston information when he needed it. Of course, it wasn't like she was an informant and doing it for any kind of personal gain, and it definitely wasn't about gossiping. Hillary only shared with Preston what she believed he needed to know to put someone away for committing a crime. She always had the best intentions. Hillary had enjoyed doing investigative work on their date. It wasn't that she couldn't speak to him about anything else, but she had needed the distraction from the conversation Preston had started. Talking to her about Matthew and Annabelle had been ballsy on his part, but it had been difficult for Hillary. It was easier to talk about things that weren't so close to her heart. So, none of them know anything about the tanning salon and Giovanni's partnership there, Preston said, summarizing what they had learned. But he didn't keep it quiet about the wine bar he wants to open. It's still nothing more than a dream, Hillary said. It's easy to tell everyone what you want to do, but to actually do it is a different story. Rose walked past their table and stopped when she saw Hillary. I didn't know you two were going to be here tonight, Rose said with a twinkle in her eye. From the start, she had wanted to set Hillary and Preston up. We're just enjoying a dinner as friends, Preston said politely, and Hillary was glad he had worded it that way. Hillary didn't want Rose to spread all kinds of rumors, as she was wont to do. Hillary glanced at Preston, who flashed her a small smile. Rose sat down at the table, making herself comfortable even though she hadn't been invited. What news do you have on Giovanni? Rose asked Preston. I see he's out and about again. Giovanni's arrest was big news around town, but Rose also knew everything about Annabelle's involvement with Giovanni, so she was extra curious this time. Preston shrugged. There's not much I can tell you that isn't circulating around town already. Rose nodded. She knew that, of course. Rose knew everything. He doesn't seem to wait for anything, she continued. She looked toward the bar where Giovanni was serving customers. The moment he was released, he looked me up. Oh, Hillary said. You didn't tell me. Rose shrugged. Okay, so it wasn't the moment he was released, but it was this morning. Hillary nodded. Rose had a sense of self-importance when she had information to share that wasn't common knowledge. He came to ask if he could rent a space, asking if I had something available for him. Apparently, he wants to start a wine bar of some kind. I told him he was going to struggle in competition with Wine's Up, and he wouldn't tell me if he had a liquor license. Did you give him space? Hillary asked. This was the best confirmation they had heard so far about Giovanni's intentions to open his wine bar after leaving the tanning salon behind. I don't have anything available right now, but I did tell him that I would let him know. I'm not one to turn away business, you know. It's not my problem if he can't make it, as long as he keeps paying his rent. Hillary and Preston glanced at each other as Rose prattled on about what she had heard around town. It looked like their date night was over if Rose was going to stick around, and when she pulled the menu closer, it was clear she was going to stay for a while. Hillary couldn't very well ask Rose to leave without the woman becoming suspicious of why Preston and Hillary wanted to be alone. Preston and Hillary had no choice but to accept how their night was going to turn out. Chapter 8. The next morning, Hillary had a lot on her mind. The night with Preston had ended like nothing resembling a date, thanks to Rose arriving, but they had found out a lot of information, which was more than Hillary had bargained for. All she wanted to do when she asked to go to Antonio's was watch Giovanni interact with everyone around him. Everyone at the restaurant had agreed that Giovanni intended to leave soon, and Rose confirmed it when she said Giovanni had asked her for a space to rent. What it sounded like to Hillary was that Giovanni planned to cut ties with the tanning salon of his own accord, which meant that it couldn't have been a big deal if he was being removed by his partners. Certainly not enough to murder someone over. Which led Hillary to think that perhaps it had nothing to do with Giovanni. Maybe he wasn't the partner who was meant to be pushed out. If that was the case and Giovanni wasn't the object of the dissolution, then who was? Hillary had found the papers to break up the partnership at the Public Records Office when she had gone that day, but there was no information other than the filing for dissolution. There was no way to find out which partner they were trying to get rid of, and the more Hillary thought about it, the more she wondered if that wasn't the key to solving the case. Or maybe it had nothing to do with partnerships and relationships gone sour, but something else entirely. It would yet again prove Giovanni innocent if Hillary's hunch was correct. Seeing that Giovanni was already living his life like a free man again, Preston already figured he hadn't done it. Hillary by no means wanted to accuse the man of something as horrific as murder, but she didn't like that he looked more and more like his hands were squeaky clean. Of course, that was personal. Hillary didn't like Giovanni, and certainly didn't approve of him where Annabelle was involved. When Hillary arrived at something special with Annabelle, she still didn't know how she was going to go about finding out who was being pushed out of the tanning salon partnership. The best way to find out, of course, was by getting close to the people involved. Hillary didn't know anyone who had been close to Tara, or who was friends with Celeste. But she did know someone close to Giovanni. As much as Hillary hated to admit it, Annabelle was the best person for the job. The ladies at Something Special worked hard to open the shop and get the merchandise ready for the day. When everything was set, Rose offered to run to Antonio's for their morning coffee. Hillary handed her cash from the till, and Rose disappeared into the morning sun. It was the moment Hillary had been waiting for. She turned to Annabelle. "I need your help," she said. Annabelle frowned. "Is this about your sniffing around? I don't like being involved in your so-called cases." Hillary shook her head. "It's not about that, not entirely." "That sounds like it's exactly about that," Annabelle said. "It's about Giovanni." At that, Annabelle perked up. Hillary explained what she needed and why. "You're the only person close enough to make it happen. If we find out who they were trying to push out, it will only prove Giovanni's innocence even more." Annabelle narrowed her eyes at Hillary, trying to figure out if her mother was only saying this to get her involved or if she was being honest. She turned all the facts over in her mind and decided that even though Hillary openly disliked Giovanni, there was no way she could be trying to trick Annabelle into helping her. Her mother would never do that to her own daughter. She would never expect Annabelle to do something against her will if she made a choice to stay out of it. "Okay," Annabelle finally agreed. "I'll see what I can find out." Hillary smiled and hugged Annabelle. Rose returned with the coffee, catching the last bit of the conversation. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Hillary and Annabelle exchanged glances. It was always a risk involving Rose, but seeing that Rose and Hillary were good friends and she had shared vital information, Hillary decided to fill in her friend. Annabelle listened as her mother explained everything briefly. Rose shook her head. "The two of you are always conspiring to stick your nose in someone else's business." Annabelle laughed out loud. "That's the funniest thing you've ever said." Rose shrugged wryly and admitted that it was slightly hypocritical. "If you ask me, this has nothing to do with business and everything to do with personal vendettas." "What do you mean?" Annabelle asked. I don't think they're getting rid of this partnership thing for any other reason than the fact that Giovanni left a heartbroken line of ladies behind him, and the tension took over. Annabelle shook her head. She didn't like hearing about Giovanni's past, but it seemed impossible to avoid it. No matter how much she wanted to turn a blind eye to the women he had so obviously strung along, something always happened to remind her that she was just a number on a list, a long list. I think the best way to handle this sort of thing is the old-fashioned way, Rose continued. What's that? Annabelle asked. Word of mouth, of course. This town thrives on it. The gossip. Of course. It was a good way to get information about something, but Annabelle wasn't sure how accurate it would be. Stories tended to evolve in the retelling, and in Rosemary Harbor, retelling stories was practically a sport. There has always been tension between Giovanni and Celeste, Rose said. After their breakup was so messy, I can't imagine doing business together went very well. Annabelle frowned. On the last wine club night, when Celeste had acted so shocked about Annabelle's confession that Giovanni was taken, she hadn't thought much of it. But if Rose knew about a messy breakup, it had to mean that more had happened. And if it had, more people would know about it. Word of mouth, as Rose had said. But Annabelle was annoyed with Rose. She didn't like that the woman was making life with Giovanni sound difficult. Despite everything she had told her mother, Annabelle realized she still had a soft spot for him, and even though everyone else seemed to disapprove of her feelings for Giovanni, Annabelle was sure he felt something for her in return. It wasn't just the charm, she knew he used that on a lot of people. There was something more between them, a friendship that went deeper than just their romantic attraction. But no one would understand that, and after Annabelle had made up with Giovanni yet again, she had expected everyone to have something to say about it. Her mother, of course, was the least happy. But Annabelle often asked her if she had forgotten how it felt to be young and in love. Because of everyone's obvious disapproval of Annabelle's relationship with Giovanni, she didn't resort to the gossip around town the way her mother and Rose liked to do so often. Instead, she went to the public records office herself and looked up information on the tanning salon. The woman behind the desk was quiet and helpful, and it didn't take long before Annabelle had the file in front of her. She eagerly read through the information that was available, but she very soon realized there was nothing to report. When she left the public records office, Annabelle was in a bad mood. It wasn't her job to run around looking for clues in a case that she had no interest in, now that Giovanni had been released. It was her mom's thing to investigate and to find clues. But Annabelle wanted to help Giovanni. Preston had let him go due to the belief that he was innocent. She refused to believe he was let go merely due to lack of evidence to charge him. But after word had spread about his arrest, a lot of people still wondered about his involvement with Tara's death. She knew that would continue until the real murderer was caught. Even though Annabelle believed he was innocent and Preston had released him, the town still judged Giovanni, and Annabelle wanted to set the record straight for him. She cared for him and wanted to help him. Annabelle wondered how she was going to find out what she needed to know. There had been nothing in the public records about the business, so she had to find another way to figure it out, but it was harder than it sounded. Maybe she had to rely on word of mouth, as Rose suggested after all. Word of mouth was an age-old concept, but it had been reinvented with the introduction of social media. And instead of running around asking everyone about their opinion the way Hillary did, Annabelle decided to turn to the internet. With platforms like Facebook and Twitter, everyone was willing to share information of their own free will rather than to have it drawn out of them. Annabelle went back to the shop. Rose was on her lunch break, and Hillary was busy with a new basket idea in the stockroom. Annabelle sat in front of the computer at the till and logged onto her Facebook account. She didn't want to delve into Giovanni's rich and lengthy history with other women, but if she wanted to figure out what had happened and whose head had been on the chopping block, it had to be done. Once Giovanni's name was cleared and everyone stopped whispering about him, Annabelle would be able to move on and forget about Giovanni's past. It was just a matter of time. When Annabelle was logged on, she clicked on Celeste's page. She was friends with her on Facebook, as she was with most of the other younger people in town. Annabelle and Celeste weren't the best of friends, but Facebook offered a lot more than Celeste had ever told Annabelle in person. When Annabelle scrolled down Celeste's newsfeed, she realized that Rose had been right. By the looks of things, the breakup between Celeste and Giovanni had been quite messy. Celeste was the type of person who posted everything on Facebook, from what she had for lunch all the way to airing dirty laundry online. And there was a lot about Giovanni. What bothered Annabelle even more was that she hadn't had to scroll very far down to find information about Giovanni on Celeste's feed. The breakup had been fairly recent, it seemed. It explained why Celeste had been so upset when Annabelle had mentioned that she knew for a fact Giovanni was taken, but it made Annabelle wonder if he had still been involved with Celeste while he had charmed Annabelle. She didn't put it past him, and that was a red flag. There had been so many red flags about her relationship with Giovanni, it made Annabelle's head spin. But despite all the indications that Annabelle might be better off without him, she couldn't help feeling about him the way she did. There was something about Giovanni that made her weak in the knees. She pushed away the thought that his charm was why he had so many women after him, and that he might use it again and again. After Annabelle read through everything Celeste had posted about Giovanni, she frowned and tried to find another angle. There was a lot to find out if she knew where to look. There had been mention before that Tara had been involved with Giovanni. If that was the case and Tara was as open on Facebook as Celeste was, Annabelle was sure she could find some information. She looked at Tara's page. It was flooded with messages about her death, about missing her and wishing for her to rest in peace. But when Annabelle scrolled further down, she noticed that there had been obvious tension between Celeste and Tara. The two women had been best friends, but Tara had obviously dated Giovanni at some point as well, and it had been a very serious point of contention between the two women. All their messages were sweet with an underlying bite in them, and Annabelle was starting to understand what was going on. Annabelle wasn't her mother by a long shot. She wasn't as curious as Hillary was, and she preferred to stay out of the business that circulated in Rosemary Harbor completely. She liked to think back to her life in Miami, and one day, she wanted to move back to a big city where she was just a face, and everyone didn't know everything about each other. Until then, Annabelle was okay living in the small town. She couldn't always avoid the gossip, but it was entertaining most of the time, and there was the added bonus of having met Giovanni. But Annabelle wasn't so sure about Giovanni. She could never completely get rid of the doubts about whether or not she should be with him. Maybe he wouldn't be in her future, even though she somehow hoped he would be. She knew Hillary disapproved, and despite Annabelle's own feelings for Giovanni, she understood where her mom was coming from. For now, Rosemary Harbor was Annabelle's home, and her life was here. So, when it came to finding information for Giovanni's sake and helping Preston make the town a safer place, she would do what she could. She had definitely inherited her mother's sleuthing abilities, if the information she had just found was anything to go by. And she was putting two and two together to find something out where she could only read between the lines. As far as Annabelle could tell, none of this, the partnership being pulled apart and even Tara dying, had anything to do with Giovanni. It was a relief, of course, but Annabelle had a feeling that maybe he had been in the middle because he had been after the women. This was between Tara and Celeste, and Annabelle was almost certain that the person being kicked out of the partnership should have been Celeste. Seeing that Celeste was one of the two friends who was still alive, and that Giovanni seemed to be totally uninvolved, made Annabelle wonder exactly how upset Celeste had been with her friend, and if it was only about a relationship, or if there was more involved. Like perhaps Celeste was the woman who would have been pushed out, had Tara's life not come to such a horrible end. It certainly was a motivation to get even with her, but that wasn't Annabelle's place to say. Chapter 9. Hillary was in the stockroom, playing around with new basket ideas, when Annabelle called her to show her something on the computer. Hillary let Annabelle show her all the posts and messages, before Annabelle explained what she had figured out. Hillary couldn't believe how quickly Annabelle had found out information, and how beautifully she had pulled everything together. Hillary was proud of Annabelle for coming to conclusions the way she had. Annabelle was definitely her daughter. "I think we need to talk to Preston about this," Hillary said, after she heard everything Annabelle had to say. "He'll know what to do with the information." Annabelle nodded. Her phone beeped and she picked it up, unlocking the screen. "Can I take a 15-minute break?" she asked Hillary. Hillary nodded, her mind already on other things. While she dialed Preston's number, Annabelle walked outside with the door jingling upon her exit. Hillary noticed through the shop window that Giovanni was outside something special, waiting for Annabelle with a grin on his face. Hillary sighed. After her recent talk with Annabelle, she had hoped her daughter was really and truly done with the guy. Hillary grimaced, but there was nothing she could do. Best that she threw herself into what she was trying to achieve. When Preston answered, Hillary explained what Annabelle had found. "That's all very possible," Preston said. "But it's not much proof of anything. It's all speculation, although I must admit that it's very good." It was great of Annabelle to jump in and help. "She was doing it to try to clear Giovanni's name, of course," Hillary said. "But I was thinking about your proof. I don't know if it will do any good, but if you can find out who exactly filed the paperwork to change the partnership, maybe that will help. I will need a warrant for that, but I might be able to get it." Hillary said that it would be great if they could find out who had filed it, because if it wasn't Tara, it might have been a reason to kill her. But Giovanni had looked for an exit plan as it was, judging by what everyone else was saying about his wine bar idea. It wouldn't have made sense that he would kill Tara if he was already on his way out. Unless it was over a new boyfriend in Tara's life. A crime of passion seemed much more up Giovanni's alley. She glanced out the window where Annabelle and Giovanni were talking and rolled her eyes when she saw the man lip-locked with her daughter. If he was upset about another man in his former girlfriend's life, he was hiding it very well by funneling all his passion into his makeout session with Annabelle. As Hillary watched, they broke the kiss, and Giovanni gave her a lingering look as he turned to leave. Annabelle was all smiles, flushed and happy when she came back into the store. "What?" she asked Hillary, who only shook her head. Hillary knew that Preston was running around getting warrants to look into the legal files on the partnership between the three owners of a place in the Sun. In the meantime, Hillary thought that she could perhaps pay Celeste a visit. If she could get something out of her, it would help, and Hillary had been known in the past to draw information out of people with her friendly manner. It wasn't that Hillary wanted to trip the woman up into a confession. She hoped dearly that Celeste was innocent, that she hadn't done anything that she would end up regretting. But there were so many facts, and they were all starting to point in Celeste's direction. If someone committed a crime, they had to be punished for it. So far, Celeste had been mourning Tara quite publicly. Tara had been her best friend, after all. But Hillary had seen the passive-aggressive messages and had heard what Annabelle told her, and it was beyond her how best friends could do such things to each other. Maybe they hadn't been best friends at all toward the end. Hillary thought that if she could get Celeste to admit that Tara was the one pushing her out of the business, she could beat Preston to the punch. Her reasoning was that if Tara had been the one to push Celeste out of business, it would be enough motivation for Celeste to kill Tara. Especially after everything the two had been through during their friendship. From what Hillary could tell, there hadn't been much of a friendship left by the time of Tara's death. Celeste was mourning her, but maybe she was only mourning the loss of a friendship that had died a long time ago, or putting on a facade to point the finger at someone else for Tara's murder. In an attempt to find a reason to see Celeste, Hillary walked into the stockroom and packed a gift basket. Rose was back in the shop, so Annabelle was with Hillary, typing away on her phone and smiling from ear to ear. Hillary didn't like Giovanni, but she had to admit that lately Annabelle had seemed very happy. And no matter what Hillary disagreed with, if her daughter was happy, she had to wonder about her relationship with Giovanni. He wasn't the right person for her daughter in Hillary's opinion, but maybe he wasn't a bad person. Maybe there was something about him that only Annabelle knew about. Whatever it was, if Annabelle was happy and she stayed that way without anger and heartbreak lacing their relationship the way it had until now, Hillary was willing to accept Giovanni. "I'm handling a delivery," she said to Rose, who stood behind the counter cutting ribbons. "I don't know how long I'll be." Rose frowned. "Are you doing something for the shop or something for Preston?" Hillary smirked, but didn't answer. She didn't have to. Rose knew that things were coming to a close, and she knew that Hillary needed the case to be solved for Annabelle's sake. After Hillary told her what to tell Preston if he called her at the shop, Rose watched Hillary leave. It was a messy one, she thought. Annabelle was involved with a boy who wasn't good for anyone, and Hillary was all worked up about it, as a mother should be. But the tanning salon murder made Hillary think about Matthew, and Rose knew that it made everything so much harder. Rose hoped for Hillary's sake that the case would draw to a close soon. She was on the sidelines, watching two people she cared about, going through the motions of events they couldn't control. Hillary was worried that Annabelle would eventually experience heartbreak. Even though Rose always knew everything, she couldn't stop her friends from getting hurt. The best she could do was be there for them when they needed her love and support. Telling Rose goodbye, Hillary set out to a place in the sun armed with the basket and the intention to find out what really happened. When Hillary arrived at a place in the sun, Celeste looked confused. She opened her book and scanned it for an appointment or a delivery receipt. "I wasn't expecting you, Hillary," Celeste said. "I know," Hillary said. "I just thought I would drop by and offer you a sympathy basket. This can't be easy for you." Celeste looked at the basket, blinking once or twice before she burst into tears. Hillary's heart went out to the poor girl. No matter what had happened or who was to blame, a life had been lost and it was sad. "I can't believe this is what it's come to," Celeste sobbed. "She was my best friend, but so much went wrong and now we'll never be able to fix it." Hillary nodded. She put the basket on a table and walked to one of the chairs and sat down. Celeste followed her and sat down too. She scrubbed her face, trying to get rid of the tears as they fell down her cheeks in a never-ending stream. It was as if she had been holding back the tears for so long, being strong when she needed to run a business. But Hillary's simple gesture had broken the damn wall, and it all had come crashing down on her. "Sometimes I find myself wishing we could turn back the clock," Celeste said. "There was so much I would have done differently. It's so easy to get angry when you think you'll be able to fix it again later. And then suddenly there is no more time, and you realize it's too late." Hillary listened as Celeste started telling her what had happened between her and Tara. She explained how Tara had been with Giovanni before Celeste, and when Celeste had started dating him, she had felt bad and spoken to Tara about it. Tara had told her best friend that it was all right, but it turned out it wasn't. "She would hold it against me all the time," Celeste said. "She would make it seem like I owed her somehow for doing the one thing a best friend shouldn't do, and dating her ex. I felt bad, so I let her have her stupid moment of glory, but it dragged on and she just wouldn't let it go." Hillary listened to Celeste's story, hearing what the girl had to say. She understood what Celeste was saying, and was able to verify everything she heard with what Annabelle had shown her online. It was a terrible shame that a man had come between two friends. "I wish I had never fallen in love with him," Celeste cried. "If I had stayed away from him, everything might have been different. But look at me now, look at where I am." She gestured all around as if the tanning salon was her personal version of hell. Hillary didn't quite understand what Celeste meant by that, but she realized that Celeste was distraught. Her tears were so genuine and her pain so real that Hillary was starting to think she had been wrong in thinking that Celeste could have done it. Surely, a woman grieving like this couldn't have been responsible for the death of a friend? How is this affecting your business? Hillary asked, trying to get the information she had come to find out. Celeste sighed. It's dropped. Obviously, no one wants to come to a place where someone has been killed. And I couldn't do it all alone if we were running full capacity anyway. It was always the two of us, working together and sharing the load. Hillary took a chance. I heard that Giovanni was thinking about leaving a partnership that had fallen apart a little. Celeste looked at Hillary with watery eyes. So you know about the dissolution papers? Hillary admitted that she did, not sure how Celeste would take the news that she had found out something that shouldn't have been general knowledge. So you know, she said. I feel so bad about it, but I had to file those papers. Hillary sighed in relief. If Celeste had filed them, then she couldn't have killed Tara, could she? I wanted her gone. I couldn't do it anymore. Not the partnership or the friendship, not seeing her every day. You see, Giovanni left me. He didn't tell me why he dumped me. Then I heard that he was with someone else, and Tara started getting all these flower arrangements and gift baskets, and I started to think that maybe they were back together again. Hillary thought back to Celeste's face at the wine club when Annabelle said she knew for a fact Giovanni was taken. Hillary had been upset that Annabelle thought to hide the information about dating Giovanni from her. Now she realized how wrong it had come across to Celeste, allowing her to think that her friend was betraying her the way she must have felt she had betrayed her too. I thought that if I could just get rid of Tara, if she could just be out of the picture, it would be different. I could run the company the way I wanted to, and Giovanni and I could be together. Hillary frowned. Why would getting her out of the business allow you to be with Giovanni? She didn't understand. Celeste cried harder. Hillary didn't know how to appease the girl. She sobbed into her hands, so Hillary pulled her against her in a side hug, her mom instincts taking over. She couldn't stand seeing someone heartbroken, and Celeste looked like she was at her end. Everything had gone wrong for her, and it was a terrible shame that she had lost so much in so little time. I'm sure everything is going to be all right, Hillary said. Celeste shook her head, sniffling. It won't, she said. Nothing can be all right again. I did it. Hillary stiffened. Did what? She asked carefully. Tara was always lying in those damn machines, trying to look better, to be the bronze queen. In the beginning, I didn't care, but later I started thinking she wanted to look better than me, be better than me, so that Giovanni would go for her. Hillary found a tissue in her handbag and handed it to Celeste, who loudly blew her nose. I thought that if I got her out of the way. Celeste, tell me you didn't, Hillary said, anticipating where the conversation was going. Celeste cried again, but this time they were silent tears. She was always tanning in that bed, and all those baskets and flowers kept coming in. She was high and mighty, always acting like she was above me, and I couldn't stand the idea that she would get her hands on Giovanni again. She would win then. You know? And I couldn't stand that. So, instead of cutting her out of the business like I wanted to, I watched what Robert did to fix the beds. He talks a lot about electrocution, and I paid attention. I knew what cable to disconnect. She cried harder again. Hillary hugged Celeste to her, stroking her hair and letting her cry. The poor girl had been through a lot, but that would never make up for murdering someone. It was never a justification. But all she could do now was comfort Celeste until she could compose herself again. Hillary knew that Celeste felt bad about it. Maybe her remorse would knock a few years off her sentence when she was convicted. Hillary shook her head, and her heart broke for Celeste, for Tara, and for the relationships that had brought the two friends to the end of their line. Epilogue. Hillary stood in front of the mirror, trying to decide if she felt comfortable with what she was wearing. The dress was a little younger than she usually bought, but Annabelle told her it made her look fresh, and Hillary wanted something different. She had been to the hair salon earlier to get her hair trimmed and her roots touched up with the auburn color she had sported since she moved to Rosemary Harbor. Finally, she made sure she had everything she needed in her handbag and walked through the house to find Annabelle. "What do you think?" Hillary asked Annabelle when she walked into the living room. Annabelle and Giovanni were together on the couch, watching a movie. "I think you look red hot, Mom," Annabelle said. Hillary shook her head, laughing. "It's not quite what I was going for." "Well, you should," Annabelle said. "Right, babe?" Giovanni nodded. "Looking good, Mrs. S." Hillary smiled. "Thank you, Giovanni." She looked at Annabelle. "I don't know what time I'm going to be back." "Don't worry, I won't wait up," Annabelle said with a wink. Hillary found herself blushing, and she felt silly about it. "Have fun," Annabelle said. Preston was at the door as Hillary walked to it, and she opened it for him. "You look wonderful," Preston said, looking Hillary up and down. She blushed. He had made an effort, too. He wore khaki pants and a red-collared shirt with a suede jacket. "Where are we going?" "I think we should try Saffron," Hillary said. It was a new restaurant in town. "Saffron it is," Preston said and offered Hillary his arm to lead her to his car. They walked past Giovanni's car where it was parked on the road. "Is he here tonight?" Preston asked. Hillary sighed and nodded. She struggled to understand how Annabelle could be with a man who had been at the center of a murder case, especially with the dating history Giovanni had, but for now, they were going strong. Hillary had noticed that Giovanni was making small changes, like not talking to other women the way he used to. He hadn't opened his wine bar yet, but he seemed to have taken what happened to Tara as a wake-up call. Preston opened the car door for Hillary, and she climbed in. When Preston was settled in the driver's seat next to her, he smiled at Hillary and turned the ignition. They had decided that they would stay away from Antonio's for a while. Too much had happened, and it was the town's gossip hub. Preston and Hillary were taking things slow, and the last thing they needed was a rumor about them running through the town like wildfire. "How are you feeling after everything has settled down?" Preston asked. "I'm figuring things out," Hillary said. The case had been a roller coaster for her. With Annabelle's emotions and Hillary's reminders about her late husband, it had been very up and down for her, but it was over now, and Hillary felt she had come out stronger on the other side. "I think the hardest part of all is letting Annabelle make her own mistakes, and to not expect her to follow in my footsteps. She will never have the same life I do, so she needs to make new tracks." "That's a very difficult thing to do," Preston said. "It is, but it's only fair. Annabelle isn't exactly happy about us going on a date, either. So I let her be, and she lets me be." From the start, Annabelle had been against Hillary and Preston dating at all. She had believed Hillary should stay dedicated to Matthew despite his passing, and she had been upset when Hillary told her she deserved another chance at love. Now that Annabelle was in a relationship that Hillary frowned upon, she understood a little more how it worked. She still wasn't happy about Hillary and Preston, but she wasn't quite as vocal about it as she used to be. Hillary and Preston weren't quite dating yet, but Hillary wanted to see where it could go between them. Preston was a good man, and even though she had had a great life with Matthew, he had passed away, and Hillary felt she deserved to try again. Matthew would have wanted her to be happy. And Hillary was happy. Whatever happened between her and Preston, he was her friend first and foremost, and she had become very comfortable around him. She hoped that there would be something more between them in time. She had moved on from Matthew enough to be able to at least think about investing in someone new, but for now, Preston and Hillary would spend time together courting and taking things slowly, waiting for something to naturally develop between them if it was meant to be. When they arrived at the restaurant, Preston led the way, and they were taken to a table at the back. Preston looked at Hillary and couldn't believe how beautiful she was tonight. Lately, she had been agreeing to go out with him with little hesitation. It was a far cry from when she had just arrived, when she had made it clear that she wasn't interested in anything romantic. As time went on, they had developed a friendship that finally held the promise of something more. Preston was in no hurry. If Hillary needed time, he would give it to her. She was a woman worth waiting for. Thanks for listening to Basket Delivery, Book 5 from the Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. For more information on Wendy's available books, visit www.wendymeadows.com.